Hey there, tonight we're diving into the world of Viking longship building, a craft so masterful that it could turn a tree into a sleek sea serpent. But brace yourself. The truth is, these legendary vessels had more splinters than glamour. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the dense underbrush of a Scandinavian forest, the kind that would give your average modern-day lumberjack an anxiety attack. It's the 9th century, and the air is filled with the earthy scent of pine and oak, the latter being the real superstar of our story. See if you're about to embark on the wild, wave-crashing adventure of building a Viking longship. You're going to need a whole lot of this stuff, enough to make an entire forest shiver in anticipation. Sure, you could grab just any old tree, but if you're aiming for a vessel that can dance over the sea like a Norse Bainsay, you're going to be picky. Let's talk oak. Why oak? Because oak is the Arnold Schwarzenegger of trees, strong, durable, and just the right amount of flexible. The Vikings knew this, and they were willing to clear entire swathes of woodland to get it. A single longship could gobble up over 100 trees, which is basically like inviting a beaver to a buffet. But not just any trees. We're talking about the straightest, most robust specimens that could withstand the pressures of both the ocean and the odd battle or two. And don't even get me started on the pine used for the ribs and the mast. Its lighter weight made it ideal for a ship that needed to be both sturdy and speedy. Now, here's where things get economically interesting. This wasn't just a bunch of dudes with axes wandering into the woods. Oh no, this was a carefully orchestrated operation. Timber was currency, and the cost of materials could send a chieftain's purse into a tailspin. We're talking about a resource so valuable that it could support a small economy. The logistical dance of transporting these hefty logs from forest to fjord was a feat of engineering and sweat. Imagine dragging these colossal chunks of wood over miles of rough terrain without the luxury of a pickup truck. The Vikings used sledges, manpower, and a whole lot of Viking grit to get the job done. And let's not gloss over the communal aspect of this endeavor. The construction of a longship was a community project, the medieval equivalent of a barn raising. The chieftain might foot the bill, but the whole village had a hand in it. No one was just a spectator. From the young to the old, everyone was expected to pitch in, whether it was felling trees or fashioning nails. This was a labor of love and necessity, because without a longship, your chances of raiding, trading, or even just showing off to the neighbors were slim to none. But here's the kicker. While the romantic image of Vikings as axe-wielding marauders sailing into the sunset is thrilling, it misses the point. These ships weren't just instruments of war. They were the lifeline of a culture built on exploration and trade. Think of them as the SUVs of the Viking world, versatile, robust, and essential for getting around. The myth of the aimless Viking raider is just that, a myth. These were people with a keen sense of enterprise, who understood the value of mobility in a world where the land was often less forgiving than the sea. In the end, the real story of Viking longship building is one of remarkable resourcefulness and strategic forethought. It's about a culture that saw the ocean not as a barrier, but as a pathway. So next time you see a depiction of a Viking ship slicing through the water, remember the forest it came from, the economy it supported, and the people whose lives were bound to its fate. The sea might have been vast and unpredictable, but with a longship beneath them, the Vikings were anything but lost. Now, let's dive into the bustling Viking shipyard, where the real magic happened. Picture a scene not unlike a rock concert, except instead of guitars, there are axes, adzes, and enough sawdust to make the Sahara look like a backyard sandbox. Building a longship wasn't a one-man show. It was more like an ancient Scandinavian symphony, with each artisan playing their part to perfection. First up, we have the master shipwrights, the maestros of this maritime orchestra. These guys were the Leonardo da Vinci's of their day, minus the Mona Lisa, but with a whole lot of oak. A master shipwright could glance at a pile of logs and see a sleek, seaworthy vessel ready to conquer the waves. They were responsible for the overall design, ensuring the ship wasn't just seaworthy, but capable of striking fear into the hearts of enemies and envy into the hearts of allies. Then we have the carvers, the Michelangelo of the Norse world, chiseling intricate designs into the prow. Their work wasn't just decorative. Those fearsome dragon heads weren't just there to look pretty or terrifying. They served the dual purpose of psychological warfare and keeping sea spirits at bay. You see, the Vikings weren't just warriors. They were spiritual folks who figured a little extra insurance never hurt. Now, let's not forget the blacksmiths. These folks were the unsung heroes, the grease monkeys of the Viking world. They didn't just make nails. They forged the iron rivets and tools essential for holding the whole shebang together. Without them, the ship would be about as seaworthy as a strainer. The iron used was a precious commodity, often recycled from old tools or weapons. Talk about sustainable living. And there's more to this team, like the rope makers, who spun sturdy lines out of animal hair and plant fibers. These ropes were crucial for everything from hoisting sails to tying down cargo, and occasionally prisoners of war. The sail makers, too, had their hands full crafting sails from wool or linen, often dyed a striking red, because who doesn't love a bit of flair when you're plundering the high seas? But here's the kicker. The whole operation was a well-oiled machine, with each player knowing their role down to the last detail. Think of it as the ultimate team-building exercise, but instead of awkward trust falls, you're building a vessel that could make or break your entire community's fortune. Now, let's talk timeframes. Constructing a longship wasn't a weekend project. Depending on the size and complexity, it could take anywhere from a few months to a couple of years. A 70-foot longship, like the famous Gokstad ship, required about 20,000 hours of labor. That's nearly 2-3 years of non-stop work, but given the communal effort, it was often completed in less than a year. In terms of economics, the cost to build one of these bad boys was astronomical. A single longship could cost a chieftain the equivalent of several dozen cattle, which is a lot considering your average Norseman didn't have a handy cattle ATM. But the payoff was enormous. A single successful raid could replenish the coffers beyond what the ship cost. It was a high-risk, high-reward game, but one that paid off handsomely for those willing to invest. Now, if you're picturing these shipbuilders as solemn craftsmen toiling away in silence, think again. Shipyards were lively places, filled with banter, laughter, and the occasional squabble. After all, when you spend weeks on end with a group of people, tensions can flare. But these were Vikings, not monks. They knew how to work hard and play hard, often breaking up the monotony with games, feasts, and naturally, a bit of mead. And let's not forget the women. While the men were busy in the shipyard, Viking women managed the household, crafted textiles, and often played crucial roles in trade and diplomacy. They were the backbone of Viking society, ensuring that life ran smoothly while the men focused on their shipbuilding endeavors. But let's bust another myth here. Viking shipbuilding wasn't just a seasonal activity. While winter put a damper on things, because who wants to work outside in freezing temperatures? Shipyards operated year-round. They adapted, working indoors or under makeshift shelters, because a Viking's work is never truly done. So next time you see a Viking longship slicing through the sea in a movie, remember that behind its sleek design and formidable presence lay a community's blood, sweat, and collective genius. These ships were more than just wooden vessels. They were the embodiment of a culture that thrived on connectivity, collaboration, and a little Norse ingenuity. Tune in next time as we explore how these magnificent ships were put to the test on the open ocean. Ah, the open ocean. A vast, unpredictable expanse that could either spell doom or deliver untold riches. For the Vikings, it was the ultimate arena to showcase their innovative prowess. Longships were their ticket to the world, and these marvels of engineering were built for speed, agility, and versatility. Imagine a Formula One car, but for the sea, with a design so clever it could make even today's yacht engineers shed a tear of envy. Let's start with that shallow draft. It's not just a fancy term for water depth. It was the secret weapon of the Longship. With a draft of just a few feet, these vessels could glide over waters that would leave deeper ships stranded like beached whales. This meant Vikings could navigate rivers like the Seine or the Volga with ease, launching surprise raids or trading expeditions deep into Europe's heartland. The shallow draft also allowed for beach landings, making it as easy for Vikings to disembark as it is for you to step off a bus. Next, the clinker-built hull. No, it's not related to the sound of a cash register, though it sure helped rake in the gold. This was an overlapping design where each wooden plank was fastened to the one above it in a sort of wooden herringbone pattern. You might think, big deal, but this was revolutionary. The overlapping technique gave the Longship its trademark flexibility, allowing it to ride the waves rather than be battered by them. It's like having shock absorbers for the ocean, a vital feature when you're sailing into treacherous waters where Poseidon himself might be lurking around every corner. Now, if you're picturing these ships as spacious, luxurious vessels, think again. The reality was more sardine can than cruise liner. Longships were sleek and narrow, designed for speed, not comfort. A typical longship could carry around 60 men, but with such compact quarters, personal space was a distant fantasy. Sleeping arrangements were about as cozy as a Tokyo capsule hotel, but with less privacy and more soggy boots. And let's not glamorize the onboard amenities. The bathroom situation involved little more than hanging off the side. Talk about a view. But these ships weren't just about getting from A to B, they were floating social hubs, with crews forming tight-knit communities. Imagine being stuck with the same group of people for weeks on end, sharing stories, meals, and the occasional bout of seasickness. Bonds were forged on these journeys that went beyond mere companionship. They were the lifeblood of Viking society. And while the romantic notion of noble, fearless warriors braving the high seas is appealing, the reality involved a lot of grumbling, bickering, and let's face it, the smell of men who hadn't seen a bath in months. Economically, the versatility of the Longship was a game-changer. These vessels weren't just tools of war, they were the backbone of Viking trade. The ability to navigate shallow waters meant access to trade routes others couldn't reach, opening up markets as far afield as Byzantium and Baghdad. This wasn't just about pillaging. It was about building a thriving economy that could sustain Viking settlements long after the raids had ended. The Longship was the Viking version of a Swiss army knife, handy for any situation, whether you're trading for silk or plundering a monastery. But let's bust another myth. The image of the Viking captain standing stoically at the helm, steering his ship through the stormy seas, is more Hollywood than historical. Steering was done with a large oar affixed to the starboard side. That's the right side for you landlubbers, and it required a team effort to manage. The term starboard actually comes from the Old Norse stari, meaning rudder. So next time you hear it, remember you're speaking a bit of Viking. And speaking of teamwork, navigating these ships was no easy feat. Without the luxury of GPS or even a decent map, Vikings relied on the sun, stars, and a whole lot of gut instinct. It said they used sunstones, crystals that could polarize sunlight and help locate the sun on cloudy days. Whether this is true or just another Norse legend is up for debate, but it's a testament to the Viking knack for making the most of what nature provided. In the grand tapestry of history, Viking longships were more than just vessels. They were symbols of a culture that embraced the sea as both a challenge and an opportunity. They represented a people who saw the world as a place to explore, trade with, and yes, occasionally conquer. The allure of the Viking longship lies not just in its sleek lines and fearsome reputation, but in its embodiment of the Viking spirit, resilient, adaptable, and always ready for the next adventure. As you ponder the next part of our journey, remember that while the Longship was a marvel of engineering, it was the people who crewed it that truly brought it to life. These were not just warriors. They were explorers, traders, and innovators. So stay tuned as we continue to unravel the mysteries of how these ships conquered not just the seas, but the very fabric of Viking society. And as the sails of anticipation unfurl, let's dive into the economic and political whirlpool that fueled Viking expansion like a Norse version of the gold rush. While Hollywood loves its Viking marauders, all horned helmets and fiery raids, the truth is, these seafaring Norsemen were also shrewd merchants and savvy explorers. Picture them as the Elon Musks of the medieval world, bold, enterprising, and occasionally controversial. Let's set our sights on the trade routes that span from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the bustling bazaars of Baghdad. The Vikings were the original globetrotters, turning every sea lane into a highway of opportunity. Forget the old chestnut that Vikings were just after loot and plunder. These guys were after silk, spices, and silver. And they weren't just raiding monasteries for giggles. They were in it for the economics, folks. Consider the Volga River trade route, a watery silk road that connected the Norse world to the riches of the East. Vikings navigated this route like seasoned Uber drivers, ferrying furs, walrus ivory, and slaves in exchange for luxuries like silver coins and precious silks. The Byzantine Empire, with its glint of gold and grandeur, was a favorite destination. Vikings were known to stroll into the bustling markets of Constantinople, or Miklagard as they called it, their longships loaded with goods like a medieval Amazon Prime delivery. Speaking of silver, the hoards unearthed in places like Gotland, Sweden, tell a shiny tale. One hoard alone contained over 14,000 coins, many minted far from Viking homelands, in places like Baghdad or Samarkand. This wasn't pocket change. This was serious bling, the kind that could finance a small kingdom or a particularly extravagant Viking feast. And it wasn't just silver. Amber from the Baltic Sea, sought after like the Bitcoin of its day, was another hot commodity in the Viking trade arsenal. But why stop at trade when there's land to be had? The Vikings weren't just about commerce. They were all about real estate. When they weren't busy trading, they were scouting for new homesteads. Consider the settlement of Iceland in the late 9th century, where Norse chieftains and their followers set up shop. They weren't just fleeing overpopulation in Norway. They were seeking new opportunities, driven by a spirit of adventure and the promise of fertile soil. And as if Iceland wasn't enough, they sailed even further west to Greenland and eventually North America's shores, a millennium before Columbus got his sea legs. Now let's talk politics. The Longship wasn't just a vessel for trade and exploration. It was a political tool, a floating embassy that could negotiate as deftly as it could intimidate. The Vikings knew that a well-placed longship in a foreign harbor could convey a message louder than a royal decree. It was diplomacy with a side of intimidation, the kind that made European monarchs sit up and take notice. Take the legendary Viking leader Rollo, who traded his seafaring ways for a dukedom in northern France. In 911, he and his crew of Norsemen were granted land by the French King Charles the Simple, and thus the region of Normandy was born. This wasn't just a land grant. It was a strategic alliance, a way to keep the Viking threat at bay by integrating them into the political fabric of Europe. Rollo's descendants would eventually give us William the Conqueror, who would cross the English Channel and shake up history in 1066, proving once again that the pen, or the longship, can be mightier than the sword. But let's not sugarcoat things. Viking diplomacy wasn't all hugs and handshakes. Sometimes the longship was the Viking version of a foreign policy ultimatum. When diplomacy failed, those sleek vessels became war machines, capable of launching lightning raids that left coastal towns trembling in their wake. The infamous raid on Lindisfarne in 793 was a wake-up call for Europe, a brutal reminder that the sea was a highway, not a barrier. And here's where we bust another myth, the idea that Vikings were mindless brutes. In reality, they were strategic thinkers who understood the power of surprise and speed. A well-executed raid wasn't just about the loot. It was a calculated move in a bigger game of power and control. The longship enabled these swift strikes, allowing Norse warriors to hit hard and vanish before local defenses could muster a response. It was guerrilla warfare on water, centuries before the term even existed. Yet, for all the tales of Viking ferocity, it's important to remember that their impact on European history wasn't just about raids and conquests. The cultural exchange that followed in their wake was profound. Viking settlements brought Norse customs, language, and technology to new lands, influencing everything from shipbuilding techniques to legal systems. The Danelaw in England, established by Viking settlers, left a lasting imprint on English law and governance. In the grand chessboard of medieval Europe, the Vikings played more than just the knight's role. They were the unpredictable wild card, capable of changing the game with a well-timed maneuver. Their longships were both sword and shield, tools of conquest and commerce that opened new worlds and reshaped old ones. As we sail toward the final installment of our Viking saga, keep in mind that the legacy of these seafaring Norsemen is more complex than any single narrative can capture. They were raiders and traders, settlers and statesmen, and their story is far from over. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the ripples they left on the ocean of history. Now, as we draw the curtain on our Viking voyage, let's tackle the legacy of these legendary longships head-on. Spoiler alert, it's more complicated than a Game of Thrones family tree. These sleek vessels have been romanticized more than a Renaissance painting, and yet, beneath the glossy varnish of myth lies a gritty reality worth exploring. First, let's talk sagas. Those medieval tales where Vikings sail the seas with all the flair of a rock band on tour. These stories gave longships a starring role, casting them as the chariots of Norse gods, the ultimate symbols of daring and adventure. The longship wasn't just a boat. It was a character in its own right, a trusty steed that could carry its crew into glory or the underworld. But let's be real. These sagas were the Netflix of their time, entertaining, sure, but not exactly a documentary. Fast forward to today, and you'd be forgiven for thinking Vikings spent more time on their ships than they did on land. Movies, TV shows, and books have painted them as the original action heroes, with longships slicing through the sea like aquatic Ferraris. But hold your oars for a moment. While these vessels were indeed marvels of engineering, they weren't all about the glamour. Being on a longship meant enduring the harsh realities of the sea, from bone-chilling winds to waves that could swallow a ship whole. And let's not forget the delightful aroma of 60 unwashed Vikings crammed into a space smaller than your average studio apartment. Yet, even with the less-than-glamorous aspects, the allure of the Viking longship persists. Why? Because they represent something timeless, the spirit of exploration, the thrill of the unknown, and the audacity to challenge the horizon. They were the physical manifestation of a culture unafraid of taking risks, unyielding in the face of adversity. And that's a narrative that resonates across centuries, even if it means glossing over a few facts. Now, onto the nuts and bolts, or rather, the pegs and planks. Viking maritime technology didn't just disappear into the annals of history. It laid the groundwork for future naval innovations. The clinker-built design, with its overlapping planks, was ahead of its time and influenced shipbuilding for centuries. This technique wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about practicality, allowing ships to be both strong and flexible, qualities that would be echoed in vessels long after the Vikings left the stage. Economically, the impact of these longships was profound. They turned the sea into a superhighway, connecting disparate cultures and economies. This maritime network was the medieval equivalent of the internet, perhaps less bandwidth, but infinitely more salty. The Vikings weren't just raiders. They were cultural conduits, bringing back not just loot, but ideas, technologies, and even styles. You could say they were the original influencers, shaping trends from Europe to the Middle East. Politically, the legacy of the longship is wrapped in the saga of European history itself. These vessels enabled the Norsemen to project power far beyond their icy homelands, establishing settlements, forging alliances, and occasionally toppling kingdoms. The political landscape of medieval Europe was a patchwork quilt of alliances and enmities, and the longship was the needle that threaded through it all. But let's debunk one last myth. the idea that the Viking era ended with a whimper. The truth is, the Norse influence is as enduring as a tattoo. Their language, laws, and culture seeped into the fabric of the societies they touched. The Danelaw, a region of England ruled by Viking law, left a legal legacy still visible today. And let's not forget about the linguistic souvenirs they left behind. Words like berserk and ransack are just a couple of the Norse terms that pillaged their way into the English language. In reflecting on the Viking longship, we see a vessel that was more than just a mode of transport. It was a microcosm of a society that valued exploration, adaptability, and community. While the romantic image of the Viking warrior poetically sailing into the sunset is seductive, the reality was a bit more briny, filled with grit, determination, and the ever-present smell of fish. As we wrap up this odyssey through Viking history, remember that the legacy of the Longship is as complex as the seas it once sailed. It's a tale of innovation and adaptation, of myths and hard truths. The Longship remains a powerful symbol, a reminder that history's greatest stories are rarely straightforward. They're a blend of fact and fiction, woven together like the sails that once propelled these magnificent ships across the ocean's vast expanse. So next time you picture a Viking longship cutting through the waves, think of the people who built it, the worlds they connected, and the myths they inspired. In the end, the Viking longship is not just a relic of the past. It's a testament to the enduring human spirit, a legacy that continues to sail through the currents of our collective imagination. The 16th century was a wild ride, and if the Ottoman Empire were a teenager, it'd be the kid who suddenly shot up a foot over summer vacation, complete with the awkward swagger and a closet full of clothes that no longer fit. Just a few decades earlier, in the late 1400s, the Ottomans were a respectable power, but they hadn't yet hit their growth spurt. Then, in the early 1500s, the empire expanded like it was on a medieval version of steroids. By the time young Suleiman took the throne in 1520, the Ottomans were sprawling across 3 continents, straddling Europe, Asia, and Africa like a colossal, turban-wearing colossus. Now, before we dive into the era of Suleiman the Magnificent, before he earned that snazzy nickname, let's take a gander at the political landscape of the time. The Ottoman Empire was already a force to be reckoned with, thanks to its geography. Picture a realm that stretched from the Balkans in the west to the Arabian Peninsula in the east, and from North Africa in the south to the Caucasus in the north. A smorgasbord of cultures, languages, and landscapes, all under the watchful eye of the sultans. We're talking about an area of approximately 25 million square kilometers. With a population of around 15 million people, the empire wasn't quite London in rush hour, but it was definitely buzzing. The empire wasn't just big, it was strategically positioned like a chess grandmaster's opening move. Smack dab in the middle of major trade routes, the Ottomans had a stranglehold on commerce between Europe and Asia. Forget Bitcoin. Spices, silk, and other exotic goods were the currency of choice, and the Ottomans were practically swimming in them. Their control over the Bosporus Strait was like having a toll booth on the gateway to the world's biggest marketplace. But the empire's success wasn't just about smart geography and profitable trade. Politics played its part, and it was as messy and dramatic as a season of Game of Thrones. The Ottomans had to deal with a patchwork quilt of rival powers, including the Safavid Empire to the east, the Mamluk Sultanate to the south, and those pesky Habsburgs in the west. Each was vying for a bigger slice of the power pie, and sometimes the Ottomans had to remind them who was boss. Enter Suleiman, born in 1494 in Trabzon, a city perched on the Black Sea's southern coast. He was the only surviving son of Sultan Selim I, also known as Selim the Grim. With a nickname like that, you can bet family dinners were a barrel of laughs. But Selim was no slouch. He expanded the empire significantly and laid the groundwork for Suleiman's future successes. When young Suleiman ascended to the throne at the age of 26, he inherited a well-oiled machine, but it was up to him to drive it into the record books. Suleiman wasn't just an average monarch. He was the kind of ruler who made history teachers swoon. He was smart, educated, and fluent in several languages, including Persian and Arabic. He had a taste for poetry and the arts, which was a bonus point for Renaissance man achievements. But don't let the cultured veneer fool you. Underneath was a shrewd leader with a knack for military strategy and a penchant for expanding borders. Before Suleiman could start his imperial fireworks display, he had to deal with some housekeeping. The political landscape was a minefield, and he needed to navigate it without blowing up his empire. The Ottomans were already entangled in a bitter rivalry with the Safavids, a Persian dynasty that had adopted Shia Islam as its state religion, setting them at odds with the Sunni Ottomans. This wasn't just a matter of theological debate. It was a full-blown geopolitical struggle. Meanwhile, in the West, the Habsburgs were eyeing the Ottomans like a dog with a juicy bone. Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, was a formidable adversary, ruling over a vast collection of territories that stretched across Europe. The stage was set for a clash of titans, and Suleiman was ready to make his mark. But let's not skip ahead too quickly. Before Suleiman could take on the world, he had to solidify his power at home. The Ottoman sultans wielded absolute authority, but their rule was only as stable as the loyalty of their supporters. Enter the Janissaries, the sultans, elite military corps, who were essentially the empire's special forces. This wasn't your typical army. The Janissaries were loyal to the sultan alone, and were instrumental in maintaining internal security and projecting power abroad. Suleiman, with his keen political acumen, knew he had to keep these guys happy. And he did just that by ensuring they were well paid and had a stake in his successes. After all, what's an empire without a loyal army to back it up? The Janissaries were like the empire's security blanket, and Suleiman was all about keeping them cozy. As we inch closer to Suleiman's reign, it's crucial to understand the groundwork laid by his predecessors. The Ottomans had spent centuries honing their administrative skills, creating a bureaucratic system that was as complex as it was efficient. They implemented a merit-based system of governance, which was revolutionary for its time. Talent and loyalty, rather than birthright, could propel a person to high office, which meant Suleiman had a pool of capable administrators to choose from. The empire's economy was also humming along nicely. Agriculture was the backbone, but trade was the lifeblood. The Ottomans were adept at squeezing taxes from both, and this revenue funded their military campaigns and lavish court life. They also had a knack for minting coins that were as stable as a rock in a stormy sea, which helped stabilize their economy and facilitate trade. By the time Suleiman took the reins, the empire was a well-oiled machine, but he wasn't content to sit back and enjoy the ride. He was determined to make his mark, and the world was about to find out why he would earn the moniker, the Magnificent. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's leave young Suleiman at the helm, ready to steer his vast empire into a future filled with conquests, challenges, and the kind of intrigue that would make even the most jaded historians sit up and take notice. So, we've got young Suleiman, perched on the throne in 1520, itching to put his own stamp on the Ottoman Empire. At just 26, he was ready to show the world he was no mere placeholder for his grim-faced dad. He had ideas, big ones, and wasn't about to let the empire coast on past glories. Let's just say Suleiman was like that kid in class who not only did his homework, but also turned it in with a flourish and a few extra credit projects for good measure. First things first, Suleiman needed to firm up his grip on this sprawling empire. He wasn't content with just sitting around in his palace, sipping on sherbet. Nope, ambition was the name of his game. And what better way to make a splash than with some good old-fashioned conquests? This wasn't a ruler who believed in taking the slow lane. Suleiman's initial target was Belgrade, a fortress city that was the gateway to Hungary and a thorn in the side of Ottoman ambitions. In 1521, he decided it was time to pluck that thorn. The city was seen as impregnable, but Suleiman had other ideas. After a siege that lasted about 6 weeks, the Ottomans managed to breach its defenses. This wasn't just a win, it was a statement. The Christian powers of Europe sat up and took notice. The Ottomans had arrived, and they weren't planning on leaving anytime soon. Next on the itinerary, the island of Rhodes, a strategic gem in the Aegean Sea held by the Knights Hospitaller. These guys were like the medieval version of an exclusive club, complete with chainmail and a serious knack for defending strategic outposts. But even the most stalwart defenders couldn't hold out against Suleiman's determination. After a brutal 6-month siege in 1522, the Ottomans took the island, and Suleiman's reputation as a formidable military leader was cemented. But don't let the conquests fool you into thinking Suleiman was just about adding more land to his portfolio. He was also a reformer at heart, and he knew that to truly strengthen the empire, he needed to look inward. One of his most significant reforms was in the realm of law. He wasn't content with leaving the legal system to muddle along. Instead, he streamlined it, codifying laws that covered everything from criminal justice to taxation. This earned him the nickname, the lawgiver, among his people, who knew that behind the battlefield victories was a guy who actually cared about bureaucracy. Speaking of taxes, Suleiman wasn't about to let his conquests drain the imperial coffers. He was savvy enough to understand that an empty treasury was like a leaky boat. It wouldn't get you very far. So, he put in place a series of financial reforms that ensured the empire's economy was as robust as his military. His policies promoted agriculture and trade, ensuring that the empire's wealth was as diverse as its territories. Now, back to the military campaigns, because, let's be honest, they were quite the spectacle. Suleiman's next major push was into Hungary. In 1526, he led his forces against the Kingdom of Hungary at the Battle of Mohacs. It was a decisive victory for the Ottomans, and it effectively paved the way for their domination of Central Europe. This wasn't just about adding land. It was about positioning the Ottomans as a powerhouse in European politics. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. Expansion wasn't just a series of glorious victories. It was costly, grueling, and sometimes downright brutal. The logistics alone were a nightmare, with soldiers needing to be fed, armed, and kept in line over vast distances. And let's not forget the human cost of such campaigns. For every victory, there were countless casualties, both military and civilian. The romantic image of a conquering hero often glosses over the harsh realities on the ground. Yet Suleiman knew that to maintain his empire, he needed more than just military might. His administrative reforms were surprisingly forward-thinking. He introduced a merit-based system that rewarded talent and loyalty over birthright. This was a radical departure from the norm, where nepotism and favoritism were often the order of the day. By doing so, he ensured that the empire was run by capable administrators who could handle its complexities. And boy, were there complexities. The Ottoman Empire was a tapestry of cultures, religions, and languages. Suleiman had to balance these diverse elements, ensuring that his rule was accepted across a vast and varied landscape. This meant implementing policies that, while maintaining the empire's Islamic character, were tolerant of other faiths. It was a delicate dance, but one that Suleiman managed with remarkable skill. So, as Suleiman's reign continued, he wasn't just building an empire, he was shaping it for the future. He was like a master chess player, always thinking several moves ahead. And while his military campaigns grabbed the headlines, it was his reforms and policies that ensured the empire's enduring strength. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Suleiman's story is far from over, and there are more twists and turns ahead. For now, let's leave him at the height of his powers, with the world watching his every move. The magnificent, indeed. While the world watched Suleiman's every move with awe, let's shift gears from the battlefields to the grand corridors of Ottoman culture and law, where Suleiman earned his stripes not just as a military maverick, but also as a cultural kingpin and legal luminary. Imagine the Ottoman court as a bustling office of today, but instead of water coolers, you've got ornate fountains, and instead of TPS reports, they're debating poetry and law. Suleiman's empire was as much about the pen as it was the sword. His passion for the arts wasn't just a sideline hobby, it was a full-blown cultural renaissance. He was like the Steve Jobs of his day, but instead of iPhones, he was churning out mosques and poetry. Take his signature architectural venture, for instance, the Suleimani Mosque in Istanbul. Completed in 1557, this architectural marvel wasn't just a place of worship, it was a statement. Designed by Mimar Sinan, the empire's star architect, it was a sprawling complex that included schools, a hospital, and even a soup kitchen. Talk about a multifunctional space. If only our modern office buildings could boast such amenities. But Suleiman wasn't just laying bricks, he was also crafting verses. Under his pen name, Muhibi, he pennied over 3,000 poems. And while his verses might not have made the New York Times bestseller list, they were a critical part of Ottoman culture, reflecting the era's intellectual vibrancy. His court was a gathering place for artists, poets, and scholars, creating a cultural hotbed that rivaled any Renaissance court in Europe. Yet, just like any modern office, the Ottoman court wasn't immune to politics and power plays. Enter the drama. Suleiman's favorite concubine, Roxolana, was the star of this soap opera. Her ascent from harem newcomer to Suleiman's legal wife, an unprecedented move, was like a plot twist straight out of a telenovela. The court buzzed with intrigue, with advisors and rivals scheming like it was their full-time job. Think of it as The Office, but with more turbans and less paper pushing. But let's not get too swept away by the palace drama. Suleiman's real legacy was in the legal realm. His nickname, Kanuni, or the lawgiver, wasn't just a ceremonial title. This guy was a legal eagle, reshaping the Ottoman legal system with the finesse of a corporate lawyer on a caffeine high. Before Suleiman's reforms, the Ottoman legal system was a bit like a patchwork quilt, functional but frayed around the edges. He streamlined it, creating a unified legal code that balanced the empire's complex social tapestry. Suleiman's canon, or secular laws, complemented the existing Sharia laws. He wasn't rewriting the religious playbook, but rather making sure the rules of the empire were user-friendly. His reforms covered everything from criminal justice to taxation, ensuring that justice wasn't just a concept, but a practical reality. For the first time, there was an emphasis on rights and responsibilities, making the legal system more accessible and fair. It was a bit like updating the user manual for an ancient bureaucracy, ensuring everyone understood the rules of the game. And let's not forget the economic angle, because what's law without a little cash flow? Suleiman knew that to keep the empire's coffers full, he needed an efficient tax system. His reforms ensured that taxes were collected regularly and fairly, preventing the kind of fiscal fiascos that could sink an empire faster than you can say deficit. The empire's revenue streams were as diverse as its people, with agriculture, trade, and taxes all contributing to a robust economy. Suleiman's economic policies were so effective that the empire's currency, the axe, became one of the most stable in the world, making Ottoman coins as solid as a gold standard. Now, let's take a moment to debunk some myths. Suleiman's reign wasn't all golden sunsets and harmonious governance. Beneath the glamorous veneer of court life was a world rife with tension and conflict. The harem, often romanticized as a paradise of luxury, was a political battleground where survival depended on wit and alliances. And while Suleiman's legal reforms were forward-thinking, they didn't erase social hierarchies or economic disparities. The empire was still a place where power was concentrated at the top, and dissent was a risky business. Yet, despite the challenges, Suleiman's cultural and legal contributions set a benchmark not just for his successors, but for the world. His reign was a blueprint for balancing tradition with innovation, and he managed to pull it off with a style that would make even the most seasoned diplomat nod in admiration. His legacy was a testament to the idea that an empire wasn't just about conquering land, it was about building a civilization. As we leave Suleiman's world of courts, culture, and codes, remember that this was a ruler who mastered the art of multitasking long before it became a modern buzzword. Whether you see him as a visionary or a shrewd operator, one thing's clear. Suleiman wasn't just a man of his time. He was a man for all time. And while we've peeled back some layers of his story, there's still more to uncover in the next chapters of his fascinating reign. So stay tuned. Suleiman's saga is far from over, and the next act promises to be just as riveting. Suleiman the Magnificent, lover, fighter, and occasionally a legal geek, was as much a legend in his own time as in ours. But let's not get swept away by the grandeur of his reputation without rolling up our sleeves for a deeper dive. Sure, the guy's love life was the stuff of legend, but was it really all moonlit serenades and stolen glances? Let's peel back the romance and see what was really behind the curtain. First off, there's his sweetheart, Roxolana, also known as Hurrem Sultan. Her story sounds like a fairy tale or a political thriller, depending on how you look at it. Originally a captive from what is now Ukraine, she rose through the harem ranks faster than you can say palace intrigue. Now, harems weren't just pools of silk-clad women lounging around eating grapes. They were political pressure cookers where allegiances were as crucial as beauty. Roxolana didn't just survive there, she thrived, ultimately becoming Suleiman's legal wife, a first in Ottoman history. This wasn't just a romantic gesture. It was a seismic shift in court politics. But before you whip out the tissues for this love story, remember that there was more at stake than just hearts and flowers. Roxolana wielded significant influence over Suleiman, and some historians argue that she was more of a political partner than a mere consort. Her power was such that she even corresponded with foreign leaders. Talk about a long-distance relationship. So, while the love story is captivating, the reality was a bit more Game of Thrones than Romeo and Juliet. Meanwhile, Suleiman's reputation as a fair ruler is another facet that deserves a closer look. Sure, he was called the lawgiver, but fairness is a slippery concept, especially when you're the one writing the rules. His legal reforms were undoubtedly groundbreaking, but they were also tools for consolidating power and maintaining order. His fairness often balanced on a tightrope between justice and control, and sometimes it leaned more towards the latter. Plus, ruling an empire wasn't all parades and poetry readings. Suleiman faced revolts and rivalries that could have easily toppled less savvy rulers. Take the Janissaries, for instance. They were a loyal bunch, sure, but keeping them happy was like trying to appease a herd of cats, fickle and occasionally ferocious. They enjoyed privileges, but they also had the power to make or break a sultan. Suleiman had to handle them with the kind of finesse that would make a diplomat sweat bullets. And then there were the revolts. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman wasn't immune to the occasional uprising. Consider the 1526 rebellion in Anatolia, led by Kayland Celebi, a charismatic leader who rallied the discontented. This wasn't just your run-of-the-mill peasant uprising. It was fueled by social grievances and religious tensions. Suleiman had to squash this rebellion with an iron fist, demonstrating that while he was fair, he wasn't above using force when necessary. The Sultan's approach was less, let's sit down and talk about it, and more, bring out the big guns. Speaking of rivalries, the Safavids were always lurking to the east, ready to pounce. The two empires were in a constant chess match, with each move calculated to undercut the other. Suleiman's military campaigns were as much about defending his empire as they were about expanding it. His strategic brilliance lay in his ability to keep multiple adversaries at bay while still managing to grow his empire's influence. It's like he was juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle, and somehow he made it look easy. But the empire's Achilles' heel wasn't just external enemies, it was also internal strife. Dynastic rivalries were a constant threat. Suleiman's choice to elevate Roxolana and her sons created a rift with his firstborn Mustafa, who many saw as a natural successor. The tension climaxed in 1553 when Mustafa was executed on charges of treason. This wasn't just a family spat. It was a seismic event that shook the empire and left a stain on Suleiman's legacy. No amount of poetic justice could erase the reality of patricide. So was Suleiman the Fair and just ruler of Ottoman law? Well, history isn't a fairy tale, and every ruler has their shadows. Suleiman was a master tactician who knew that sometimes fairness took a backseat to necessity. His reign was a dance between idealism and pragmatism, where the lines between right and wrong were often blurred. In essence, Suleiman's era was a tapestry of contradictions. His love life was as much about politics as passion. His legal reforms were as much about control as justice. His military campaigns were as much about defense as conquest. And yet, through it all, he was undeniably magnificent, not because he was flawless, but because he managed to navigate the turbulent waters of empire building with remarkable skill. As we prepare to delve deeper into Suleiman's reign, remember that the story is far from over. There are more myths to debunk, more realities to face, and more lessons to learn from a ruler who was as complex as the empire he governed. So stay tuned, because the saga of Suleiman the Magnificent is just getting started. As Suleiman's reign unfolded, it became evident that his story was a blend of grand achievements and stark complexities. Fast forward to his later years, and you'd find an aging sultan who, despite his magnificence, couldn't escape the pitfalls of power. Suleiman might have been the empire's golden boy, but even golden boys have their tarnishes. By the 1560s, the reality of empire management was starting to weigh heavily on him. The man who once conquered Belgrade and Rhodes was now more concerned with the internal machinations of his court and the burgeoning demands of his vast territories. Let's not sugarcoat it. Governing an empire that sprawled over 2 million square kilometers wasn't like running a weekend bake sale. Suleiman's later years were marked by a shift from outward conquest to internal consolidation. His earlier military successes had expanded the Ottoman Empire to its zenith, but now the focus was on maintaining this colossal entity. Think of it as the difference between buying a mansion and actually keeping it clean. Spoiler: the latter's no walk in the park. The challenges were numerous. The once powerful Janissaries had grown complacent and, frankly, a bit too comfortable with their perks. They weren't the disciplined force they once were, but more like privileged aristocrats. And if history has taught us anything, it's that complacency is the silent killer of empires. Suleiman knew this, but was often too bogged down by court politics to address it effectively. Meanwhile, the bureaucracy that had been the backbone of Ottoman governance was starting to creak under its own weight. The merit-based system that once propelled capable administrators to power was now riddled with nepotism and corruption. Suleiman's legal reforms, while groundbreaking, couldn't entirely stem the tide of human greed and ambition. It's a reminder that even the most efficient systems are only as robust as the people running them. By the time Suleiman reached the ripe age of 70, he was still leading military campaigns, but his health was failing. His last campaign, the Siege of Shajvara in 1566, was a testament to his indomitable spirit, but also a stark reminder of his mortality. Suleiman died during the siege, his death kept secret until the fortress fell. It was the end of an era, but what a finale it was. Picture a grand chess game where the king is removed, but the pieces still fall into place, an achievement that speaks to the strength and reach of his rule. Now about those big shoes to fill. Suleiman's successor, Selim II, was more inclined to a life of leisure than leadership. Known as Selim the Drunkard, he preferred the comforts of the palace to the rigors of ruling. While Selim's reign didn't exactly lead to the empire's immediate downfall, it did mark the beginning of a slow, inexorable decline. The empire's expansion had hit its limits, and internal issues began to gnaw at its foundation like termites at a wooden beam. Suleiman's legacy, however, is more than just the story of an empire's expansion and contraction. His reign left an indelible mark on the political, legal, and cultural landscapes of the time. His legal reforms, known as the Canon, set the stage for a more structured and fair governance model that resonated beyond the Ottoman borders. His support for the arts and culture fostered a renaissance that rivaled anything happening in the West. And his military campaigns, while not without their brutality, reshaped the geopolitical map of Europe and Asia. But let's not get too misty-eyed. For all the glory and grandeur, Suleiman's reign was also a study in the limits of power. His story is a cautionary tale of how even the mightiest rulers can be undone by the very systems they create. The romanticized image of Suleiman as the perfect sultan belies the more complex truth. He was a man navigating the treacherous waters of empire building, balancing ambition with pragmatism and vision with reality. History remembers Suleiman as the Magnificent, a title he earned through both his triumphs and his trials. It's a moniker that captures the essence of a ruler who was larger than life, yet all too human. His era remains relevant today because it highlights the timeless dance between power and responsibility, between vision and execution. As we look back on Suleiman's reign, we're reminded that history isn't just about what was achieved, but also about what was learned, and sometimes what was lost. In the end, Suleiman's story isn't just a chapter in the annals of the Ottoman Empire. It's a reflection on the very nature of leadership and legacy. His reign was a masterclass in the art of empire, a testament to the power of vision tempered by reality. So, as we close the book on Suleiman the Magnificent, let's remember that history, much like Suleiman himself, is a tapestry of contradictions. Grand and gritty, romantic and real, magnificent and mundane. And isn't that what makes it so endlessly fascinating? In the bustling streets of Rome, 63 BCE, amidst the cacophony of merchants hawking their wares and the clatter of chariots, a baby named Gaius Octavius Thurinus took his first breath. No one was dropping any prophecies about his future as Rome's first emperor. Why would they? His family, although respectable, wasn't exactly on the A-list of Roman nobility. His father, Gaius Octavius, was a senator and governor, but not the kind who'd have a marble statue erected in his honor. His mother, Asia Balba Caesonia, had a more impressive pedigree, being the niece of Julius Caesar. Yes, asterisk that Caesar. But still, young Gaius was more likely to be mistaken as just another kid from a well-to-do family. As fate would have it, young Octavius had a knack for being in the right place at the right time, a skill that would serve him well as he navigated the political minefields of Rome. He was only 4 when his father died, leaving him under the wing of his formidable mother and her family connections. Fast forward to his teenage years, and he found himself rubbing elbows with the political elite, thanks to his uncle Julius. Caesar, who had no legitimate sons of his own, took a shine to his young relative. Maybe he saw a bit of his own ambition in the lad, or perhaps he just needed a reliable heir who wouldn't stab him in the back, literally. Octavius was just 18 and studying in Apollonia, present-day Albania, when the news of Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE reached him. Think of it as the ultimate, your plans just changed, moment. Instead of a cushy academic career, it was time to hustle back to Rome and deal with the chaos. But here's the kicker. Caesar had posthumously adopted him in his will, naming him his chief heir. It was like finding out you've been left the keys to a kingdom, but with the delightful catch that everyone in that kingdom wants you dead. Returning to Rome, Octavius faced a city in uproar. The power vacuum left by Caesar's death was the political equivalent of an all-you-can-eat buffet for ambitious statesmen, and Octavius had just become the main course. He was young, inexperienced, and seen by many as just a kid playing dress-up in a toga. But Octavius had a few tricks up his sleeve. He was adept at turning adversaries into allies, starting with Caesar's veterans and the more strategically minded members of the Senate. To navigate this snake pit, Octavius formed the second triumvirate with Mark Antony and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. This wasn't just a friendly get-together over wine and olives. This was a power-sharing arrangement that would have made Machiavelli proud. They divided up the Roman territories like a group of siblings splitting an inheritance, each with their own agenda and ambitions. It was a temporary alliance, sure, but it gave Octavius a foothold in a realm where the average lifespan of a political career was shorter than a Roman sandal. The second triumvirate officially came into being in 43 BCE. This was no cozy committee, but a legally sanctioned, three-headed beast with the authority to make or break laws, wage wars, and proscribe enemies. The proscriptions were particularly brutal, a political purge reminiscent of a reality show with deadly stakes. Enemies of the state found their names on hit lists, with their wealth confiscated and their lives forfeit. It was ruthless, but it worked. Octavius and his buddies had effectively turned Rome into their own personal chessboard, with human lives as pawns. In the midst of all this political maneuvering, Octavius was honing his skills in the art of public relations. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the power of image. He wasn't just the heir of Julius Caesar, he was the embodiment of Caesar's legacy. He played the part of Rome's savior, a young man stepping forward to restore order from chaos. Sure, his rivals might have seen him as a calculating opportunist, but in the eyes of the public, he was the youthful idealist carrying the torch of Caesar's reforms. The road to power was littered with challenges, from military campaigns to political betrayals. Yet Octavius was nothing if not resourceful. He knew when to strike deals and when to take risks. His rise wasn't just a matter of destiny, it was a masterclass in seizing opportunities amidst turmoil. While the myths around him might paint a picture of a man destined for greatness, the truth was far more pragmatic. Octavius was a survivor, a shrewd tactician who played the long game. And so, the stage was set for the transformation of Gaius Octavius Thurinus into Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. But that's a tale for another time. For now, remember this. The path to power is rarely a straight line, even for history's greatest figures. Most times, it's a winding road filled with political potholes and unexpected detours. Octavius just happened to be a master at navigating them. And so, just when you thought the stage was set for Augustus to ascend smoothly to power, the scene turned into a political thriller with enough twists to make a Roman soap opera look like child's play. You see, the second triumvirate was never going to be a buddy comedy. It was more like a tenuous ceasefire between frenemies with daggers hidden behind their backs. This three-headed monster, formed in 43 BCE, included Mark Antony, the charismatic general with a penchant for drama and Cleopatra, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, whose role was mostly to be the often overlooked third wheel, and of course our man, Octavius, the future Augustus, the young upstart playing the long game. Now, let's dissect how this alliance came apart faster than a toga in a windstorm. The cracks began showing almost immediately. Lepidus, tasked with governing the provinces in Africa, was quickly sidelined when his ambitions were deemed more of a nuisance. Octavius and Antony, however, were the real stars of this Roman reality show, each with an eye on the prize, sole control of Rome. Antony, stationed in the eastern provinces, found himself enamored with Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen whose political acumen was only matched by her ability to turn powerful men into lovesick puppies. Their affair was both a scandal and a political alliance, one that Octavius would exploit with the finesse of a master puppeteer. But first, he had to deal with the pesky matter of public perception. Octavius was no fool. He understood the power of narrative. In a society where public opinion could shift faster than a chariot at full speed, propaganda became his weapon of choice. He painted Antony as a traitor to Rome, a man bewitched by the eastern seductress Cleopatra. This wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was a strategic move to turn the Senate and the Roman people against Antony. He positioned himself as the champion of Roman values, the protector of tradition against the exotic allure of the East. It was a masterclass in spin worthy of any modern political strategist. Meanwhile, Antony was busy amassing power in the East, entrenching himself with Cleopatra's wealth and military resources. But Octavius wasn't about to let Antony's ambitions go unchecked. He had the Senate declare war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. Clever, right? After all, a Roman civil war might have been a hard sell, but a campaign against a foreign queen. That was just good old-fashioned Roman imperialism. The showdown came at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a naval engagement that was less about swords and more about strategy. Octavius, guided by his brilliant general Agrippa, outmaneuvered Antony and Cleopatra's fleet. The battle wasn't just a military victory, it was a psychological one. Antony's forces crumbled, and with them his dreams of Eastern domination. In the aftermath, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt, their defeat hastening their tragic end. Antony, ever the dramatist, fell on his sword. a rather Shakespearean demise before Shakespeare was even a thing. Cleopatra, refusing to be paraded through Rome as a trophy, supposedly chose the bite of an asp, though some historians suggest the method of her suicide might have been less theatrical. Either way, the romanticized legend of their deaths has endured, overshadowing the gritty reality of political failure. With Antony out of the picture, Octavius turned his attention to consolidating power. He was no longer just an heir to Caesar. He was the unchallenged ruler of Rome. But he was savvy enough to know that brute force wasn't enough. He needed legitimacy, and for that he turned to the Senate, the very institution he'd manipulated and outmaneuvered. In a move that was both shrewd and ironic, he presented himself as the restorer of the Republic. He offered to relinquish his extraordinary powers, fully aware that the Senate would beg him to stay. And stay he did, but under a new title, Augustus, the Revered One. It was a rebranding exercise that would make any modern PR agency proud. By 27 BCE, he had transformed from a young upstart with dubious legitimacy into Rome's first emperor, cloaked in the guise of a republic's protector. Augustus' reign was marked by a period of unprecedented peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana. But don't be fooled by the tranquil name. It was a peace maintained by a complex web of political acumen, military might, and calculated diplomacy. Augustus had played his cards right, turning rivals into allies or, when necessary, eliminating them altogether. His ability to adapt, to read the political landscape like a seasoned gambler, was key to his success. Yet the story of Augustus isn't just one of political triumph. It's a testament to the power of perception, the ability to craft a narrative that resonates with the people, even if it glosses over the messier truths. He wasn't just a ruler. He was an architect of image, a master of propaganda who understood that the pen, or in his case, the stylus, was indeed mightier than the sword. As we pause in our tale of Augustus' rise, we see a figure who understood the art of power like few others. He was a man who turned adversity into opportunity, who wielded propaganda like a gladiator's sword, and who, above all, navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics with a steady hand. But his story is far from over. The transformation from ambitious youth to revered leader was a journey filled with intrigue, and as we will explore, the legacy of Augustus is one that would shape the future of Rome and beyond. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel how Augustus solidified his power, built his empire, and left a mark on history that echoes through the ages. As Augustus stood on the cusp of greatness, the young upstart who'd once been dismissed as just another toga-wearing wannabe was now the undisputed power in Rome. But the real magic trick, he managed to convince everyone he was restoring the Republic, not dismantling it. Augustus was the master illusionist of ancient politics, pulling off the most audacious sleight of hand the Roman world had ever seen. But let's dig into the nuts and bolts of how he pulled this off without the Senate storming out en masse, pitchforks in hand. First off, Augustus knew that power, much like a good Roman wine, was best served in moderation, or at least with the appearance of it. After all, the Romans had a serious allergy to the word king. The last king they had, Tarquin the Proud, was booted out in 509 BCE, and they'd spent the next few centuries ensuring no one dared sit on anything resembling a throne. So Augustus had to play it cool. Instead of declaring himself King of Rome and risking a repeat of the Tarquin disaster, Augustus opted for titles that sounded as innocuous as a Roman toga party, but packed the punch of a legion. He took on the title of Princeps, meaning first citizen, which was about as humble as a ruler could get while still controlling the world's mightiest empire. Augustus also held the position of Imperator, a term used for victorious generals, subtly reminding everyone he was not just a man of words, but of action. Moreover, he assumed the role of Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, giving him the divine stamp of approval. It was a masterclass in branding, one that would make any modern marketer nod in appreciation. Now, let's talk reforms, because Augustus didn't just want to wear the titles. He wanted to make sure they meant something. One of his first big moves was establishing the Praetorian Guard in 27 BCE. Think of them as the emperor's personal secret service, but with more swords and less earpieces. Comprised of about 9,000 elite soldiers, they were stationed in Rome itself, a not-so-subtle reminder to both citizens and senators that Augustus had muscle to back up his political power. The Guard was a double-edged sword, though, with its own political ambitions that future emperors would learn to fear. But for Augustus, it was a necessary tool for maintaining order, or at least the kind of order he wanted. Beyond the shiny helmets and disciplined ranks of the Praetorian Guard, Augustus set about restructuring the very bones of the Roman government. His administrative reforms were nothing short of a bureaucratic facelift. He divided Rome into regions and districts, appointing officials to oversee everything from public safety to fire prevention. It was as if Augustus had taken a look at Rome's chaotic sprawl and decided it needed a good dose of Roman efficiency, because who doesn't love a well-organized empire? Economically, Augustus was no slouch either. He introduced a new coinage system to stabilize the economy, ensuring that his face was on every denarius circulating from Britannia to Egypt. This wasn't just vanity. It was a way to unify the empire under a single currency, making trade smoother and demonstrating that Augustus' reach extended into every pocket. He also reformed the tax system, ensuring revenues flowed steadily into the imperial coffers, enough to bankroll both public works and his ever-expanding military. Speaking of military, Augustus knew that a happy legion was a loyal legion. He established a permanent standing army, 28 legions strong, each one fiercely loyal to their commander-in-chief. Veterans were rewarded with land or money, a clever tactic to keep morale high and swords sheathed. It was Augustus' way of saying, "Thanks for your service. Please don't overthrow me." But Augustus wasn't all about soldiers and taxes. He had a keen understanding of the social fabric of Rome and sought to weave it into a tapestry that reflected his vision. He launched a series of moral reforms, promoting traditional Roman values like family loyalty and piety. In 18 BCE, he passed the Lex Julia, a set of laws designed to encourage marriage and penalize adultery. Augustus, ever the pragmatist, realized that an empire was only as strong as its citizens, and thus he set about crafting a society that mirrored his ideals. In the realm of public relations, Augustus was a maestro. He commissioned grand buildings and monuments, famously boasting that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. The Ara Passus, an altar dedicated to peace, was one such monument, a potent symbol of the stability and prosperity his rule promised. Each construction project was a two-in-one deal, beautifying the city and cementing his legacy. Yet, for all his achievements, Augustus was acutely aware of the precariousness of power. His health was never robust. He suffered from various ailments, including what some historians suggest might have been chronic stomach trouble. But Augustus was nothing if not resourceful. He used his mortality as a reminder to the Senate and people of Rome that his reign was not about personal ambition, but the stability and longevity of the Roman state. As the years rolled by and Augustus' hair turned the color of the marble he so loved, he continued to cultivate his image as the benevolent ruler. He held public games and festivals, distributing grain and money to the populace. These acts of generosity weren't just about keeping the people entertained and fed. They were strategic moves to ensure that his name was synonymous with prosperity and peace. Augustus' consolidation of power was a feat of political genius, a balancing act that involved appeasing the Senate, pacifying the military, and winning the hearts of the Roman people, all while avoiding the trappings of tyranny. He understood that the myth of his rule was as important as its reality. By crafting a narrative of restoration and renewal, Augustus set the stage for an empire that would endure long after he was gone. But remember, Augustus was just getting started. His reign wasn't just about maintaining control, it was about shaping the very future of Rome. As we continue this saga, we'll explore how Augustus' policies and reforms laid the foundations for the Roman Empire, setting the course for centuries of history. So stay tuned for more tales of ambition, power, and the indelible mark of a man who turned the chaos of the Republic into the grandeur of an empire. As Augustus steered the Roman Empire into a new era, he wasn't just playing a game of political chess. He was rewriting the rules. And speaking of rewriting, let's talk about the Pax Romana, the so-called Roman peace that supposedly turned the empire into a kumbaya-singing utopia. Spoiler alert. It wasn't all sunshine and gladiators. The Pax Romana kicked off around 27 BCE and stretched for about 200 years. It was like Rome's version of a really long spa day, minus the relaxation and with a lot more political maneuvering. Augustus, ever the savvy operator, used this period to cement his vision of Rome, stable, prosperous, and just a tad authoritarian. First on his to-do list was infrastructure. Augustus understood that good roads were the backbone of any empire, literally. The man poured money into building and maintaining roads that stretched from the Scottish Highlands to the sands of Syria. The Appian Way, already an ancient marvel, got a major facelift. It was like turning a dusty trail into a Roman superhighway. These roads weren't just about connecting point A to point B, though. They were the veins through which the lifeblood of the empire, trade, military, and ideas, flowed. The Roman legions could march quickly to crush rebellions or defend borders, and merchants could move goods efficiently, spreading Roman culture and influence along with them. Augustus wasn't just paving roads, he was paving the way for an empire. But Augustus didn't stop at roads. He had a thing for public works projects like Nero had a thing for fiddling. Aqueducts are a prime example. These marvels of engineering, like the Aqua Claudia and the Aqua Virgo, were Augustus' way of ensuring Rome didn't just survive, it thrived. Fresh water flowed into the city, supporting a population that ballooned to over 1 million souls. Augustus was providing not just for the citizens, but for the empire's heart itself. And in a city where plumbing was more revolutionary than the wheel, these aqueducts were game changers. And let's not overlook the economic boom these projects spurred. All those roads and aqueducts didn't build themselves. Augustus pumped money into the economy through construction, creating jobs faster than you could say denarius. Skilled laborers, from stonemasons to artisans, found work in abundance, and with it came a surge in urban development. Augustus was essentially the original job creator, and unemployment was about as welcome as a Gaul at a Roman dinner party. Now on to Augustus' cultural patronage. This guy was like the Medici of his day, minus the Renaissance art. He funded poets, artists, and architects, effectively turning Rome into a cultural powerhouse. Writers like Virgil and Horace were on his payroll crafting works that glorified Rome and its illustrious leader. The Aeneid, anyone. Augustus understood that culture was a form of soft power, shaping the narrative of Rome for generations to come. But let's not get too starry-eyed about Augustus' golden age. The Pax Romana had its fair share of dark clouds. Sure, peace reigned within the borders, but it was a peace maintained by a sword's edge. Augustus' policies were as much about curbing dissent as they were about fostering prosperity. The legions were never far from the action, ready to quell any uprising that dared disturb the emperor's vision of serenity. Then there were the social tensions. Augustus' moral reforms, while outwardly promoting virtue, also served as tools of control. The Lex Julia laws aimed to regulate personal behavior, promoting marriage and punishing adultery. These laws were less about morality and more about Augustus keeping a tight grip on the social fabric of his empire. He wanted a population that was disciplined, orderly, and most importantly, loyal. And while we're debunking myths, let's not forget that the Pax Romana was far from peaceful for everyone. It was a time of expansion, and that meant warfare on the fringes. The empire was constantly pushing its boundaries, and with each push came resistance. The so-called Roman peace was sometimes a facade, masking the violence and unrest simmering just beneath the surface. In the provinces, local populations weren't always thrilled about Roman rule. Some welcomed the benefits of Roman citizenship and infrastructure, while others saw it as cultural imperialism. The Jewish revolts in Judea were a testament to the fact that not everyone was singing Augustus' praises. Yet, despite these underlying tensions, Augustus' reign had undeniable success. He turned potential chaos into a well-oiled machine, proving that sometimes the carrot and the stick are best used together. His legacy wasn't just in bricks and mortar. It was in the way he reshaped an entire civilization. Augustus' impact on Rome was like a master sculptor chiseling away at marble, revealing the empire's future form. His reign set the stage for an era that would be studied and romanticized for millennia. But while the legends paint Augustus as a benevolent ruler, the reality was far more complex. His ability to blend diplomacy, culture, and a fair bit of authoritarianism was the real secret behind the Pax Romana. As we pause here, remember that Augustus' story is not just about grand achievements and public works. It's about the interplay of power and perception, the art of governing with an iron fist in a velvet glove. The Pax Romana was a time of unprecedented growth and stability, but it was also a period of contradictions and subtle tensions. But the story doesn't end here. Augustus' legacy was just the beginning. The empire he shaped would face new challenges and transformations, each echoing the complexities of his reign. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into how Augustus' Rome continued to evolve, balancing on the knife edge between peace and conflict, myth and reality. As Augustus' Rome continued to evolve, balancing on the knife edge between peace and conflict, myth and reality, we come to the final act of his epic tale. The emperor who had turned a republic into an empire and a city of bricks into one of marble was inching toward his final chapter. Augustus, with his astute political acumen, understood that controlling the narrative of his reign extended far beyond his lifetime. He knew that legacy was as much about perception as it was about power. It's 14 CE, and Rome is on the brink of a transition. Augustus, now a silver-haired patriarch in his 70s, had ruled for more than 4 decades. His health was failing, but his mind remained sharp. He had already outlived many contemporaries, including his friend-turned-rival Mark Antony, and even Cleopatra, the queen whose allure had once threatened to divide the Roman world. But Augustus knew that a seamless transition was crucial to the empire's stability. He needed a successor who could hold the reins without letting the chariot veer off the road. Enter Tiberius, Augustus' stepson from his marriage to Livia Drusilla. Augustus had no biological sons who survived to adulthood, which made the choice of heir a strategic gamble. Tiberius wasn't exactly the life of the Roman party. Think more brooding philosopher than charismatic leader. But he was capable, a seasoned general with a resume that included successful campaigns in Germania and along the Danube. Tiberius had the military creds, which in Rome was as essential as knowing how to properly don a toga. The transition of power wasn't smooth sailing, though. Augustus, ever the master planner, had adopted Tiberius formally, giving him a leg up in the succession stakes. But even with this endorsement, Tiberius' path to the throne was more of a tightrope walk than a victory parade. The Roman elite were wary, unsure if Tiberius could fill Augustus' sandals. His reputation was that of a reluctant ruler, a man more at peace with his scrolls and thoughts than with the cutthroat world of Roman politics. Augustus died on August 19, 14 CE, in Nola, a small town near Naples. His death marked the end of an era, but it was the beginning of his deification. Augustus had prepared for this moment with the precision of a Roman engineer. In his will, he left instructions for his body to be brought back to Rome and laid to rest in his mausoleum, a grand structure he'd built on the Campus Martius. It was a final act of stage management, ensuring that even in death, he remained close to the heart of his empire. The Senate, not one to miss a beat, declared Augustus a god. It was the ultimate posthumous promotion, transforming him from a man who had reshaped Rome into a deity who would watch over it. Temples were erected in his honor, and Augustus' image became a fixture in Roman worship. This wasn't just a tribute. It was a political maneuver to cement the new imperial cult, blending politics with religion in a way that would keep the populace in line and the power structure intact. But let's not get too carried away by the incense and marble statues. Augustus' deification was as much about solidifying the Julio-Claudian dynasty as it was about honoring his achievements. By making Augustus a god, the Senate wasn't just paying homage. They were reinforcing the legitimacy of his successors. It was a shrewd tactic to ensure that Tiberius' ascension was not just an inheritance, but a divine right. Yet the legend of Augustus is a two-sided coin, shiny on one side, tarnished on the other. The romanticized view paints him as the benevolent architect of Rome's golden age. But the reality? It was a mix of calculated ruthlessness and visionary brilliance. Augustus understood the power of myth, the importance of crafting a narrative that would endure. He wasn't just building an empire. He was building a story, one that would be told and retold for centuries. Augustus' reign was a masterclass in optics. He knew that the facade of a restored republic was as crucial as the power he wielded behind the scenes. By allowing the Senate to retain its traditional roles while holding the true power of imperator, Augustus gave the illusion of shared governance. It was a political sleight of hand that kept the peace in the heart of Rome while he extended his control across the empire. Economically, Augustus laid the groundwork for prosperity. His reforms stabilized the currency, expanded trade networks, and integrated conquered lands into the Roman system. But these achievements weren't just about economic savvy. They were about control. By ensuring that the empire's wealth flowed through Rome, Augustus tied the province's fortunes to the capital, creating a web of dependency that kept potential rebellions in check. Socially, Augustus' moral legislation attempted to shape Roman society in his image. He understood that an empire was not just an administrative entity, but a cultural one. His laws promoted family values and civic duty, creating a societal framework that reflected his vision of Roman virtue. But these reforms were as much about consolidating power as they were about moral high ground. By regulating the private lives of his citizens, Augustus ensured that the social order remained intact, and by extension, his rule unchallenged. As Augustus' story draws to a close, we're left with a figure who was both a political genius and a master of myth-making. He transformed the Roman world, leaving a legacy that was as much about perception as it was about reality. His life was a testament to the power of narrative, the ability to shape history not just through deeds, but through the stories we tell about them. And what of Tiberius, the man who would step into Augustus' formidable sandals? His reign would be marked by a different kind of rule, one that lacked the charisma and vision of his predecessor. Tiberius was a competent administrator, but never quite captured the Roman imagination the way Augustus had. Yet, his ascension was a reminder that Augustus' greatest achievement was not just in the empire he built, but in the dynasty he solidified. So, as we wrap up this saga of ambition, power, and legacy, we're reminded that history is a tapestry woven from both the threads of reality and the myths we create. Augustus, the man who reshaped Rome, understood this better than anyone. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of image, the art of crafting a narrative that would stand the test of time. In the end, Augustus' story is not just about the rise of an empire, but about the enduring human desire to be remembered. He turned the chaos of the Republic into the grandeur of an empire, leaving behind a legacy as complex and multifaceted as the man himself. The myth of Augustus, like the empire he built, continues to echo through the corridors of history, reminding us that the past is never just what happened, but how we choose to remember it. In the early hours of June 20, 1837, an 18-year-old named Alexandrina Victoria was rudely awakened with news that would change not just her life, but the course of British history. She was now Queen Victoria, and if you think your Monday mornings are rough, imagine learning you're suddenly in charge of the world's most powerful empire. Unlikely, you say. Well, Victoria's ascent to the throne was more accidental than predestined, a royal game of chance that would make any soap opera writer green with envy. Victoria wasn't supposed to be queen. She was fifth in line, and her path to the throne was cleared not by destiny, but by a series of unfortunate events and untimely demises in the royal family. Her uncle, King William IV, had outlived all his legitimate children. Before him, her father, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, had shuffled off this mortal coil when she was just a tot. Her cousins were either childless or deceased. It's as if the royal family had read too many tragic novels and decided to live them out. Now, the political and economic scene Victoria stepped into was as chaotic as a bustling London street during rush hour. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, turning Britain into a powerhouse of smoky factories and railways that seemed to erupt from the ground overnight. By the time Victoria took the throne, Britain was producing more iron than the rest of the world combined. A staggering 2 million tons by 1850, with those iconic steam engines puffing around like they owned the place. But let's not gloss over the fact that this revolution was double-edged. Sure, Britain had more gadgets than a modern-day tech conference, but those nifty inventions came with social upheaval. Picture a society where children as young as 6 worked in those dark, satanic mills for 12 hours a day. The Chartist movement, which sounded more like a knitting club than a radical political campaign, was fighting for voting rights for all men, not just the privileged few. Spoiler alert, they didn't succeed in Victoria's time, but hey, they got the conversation started. Then there's Victoria's personal life, which could fill an entire season of The Crown, with enough drama to leave you questioning your own dull existence. Enter Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, her first cousin, because why not keep it in the family? Their marriage was a love match, unusual for royals of the time, and they tied the knot in 1840. Albert was the yin to Victoria's yang, sharing her interests in arts and sciences. He was also the guy behind the Great Exhibition of 1851, the world's first expo, which showcased over 100,000 objects from industrial machinery to the Koh-i-Noor diamond, dazzling over 6 million visitors. Albert wasn't just a pretty face in a uniform. He was a man of action, albeit with a penchant for the grandiose. Case in point, the Albert Memorial. Erected after his death in 1861, this Gothic confection in Kensington Gardens is more monument than memorial, costing around £120,000 at the time, roughly £15 million today. It's a structure that screams, "Remember me," with its 176-foot height and enough gold leaf to gild a small kingdom. But it's also a testament to their partnership that Victoria would honor him so extravagantly. They had 9 children, and while Victoria might have been a formidable monarch, she was less enthusiastic about motherhood, famously referring to newborns as frog-like. Yet, despite the sometimes rocky relationship with her offspring, their union spread Victoria's lineage across Europe, earning her the nickname Grandmother of Europe. Politically, Victoria's reign saw the expansion of the British Empire to dizzying heights. Her official title, Empress of India, was added in 1876, a nod to Britain's most prized possession. The crown jewel, you might say, though it was a jewel obtained through a mix of trade, treaties, and the occasional military nudge. A bit like a historical version of Monopoly with higher stakes. But the empire wasn't all tea and scones. It was a complex web of control and exploitation, where local industries were often crushed under the weight of British economic policies. Victoria's reign was as much about change and progress as it was about holding onto tradition. Her time saw the rise of railways, the telegraph, and the penny post, revolutionizing communication and travel. If you think your morning commute is bad, imagine the pre-Victorian era when a journey from London to Edinburgh took days. By the end of her reign, the train could whisk you there in just 10 hours. Now, let's not ignore the myths that have grown around Victoria, like ivy on a grand old manor. The image of her as a dour, humorless widow in black is only part of the story. Yes, she mourned Albert's death for decades, but she also had a sharp wit and a keen interest in the arts. Her diaries reveal a woman who loved opera, kept a tight grip on her prime ministers, and enjoyed a good laugh, though perhaps not at the expense of her subjects. In the end, Queen Victoria was a complex figure who navigated a world in transition. Her unlikely ascent to the throne set the stage for a reign that would reshape Britain and the world. Even today, the echoes of her era are felt in the architecture, the legal systems, and the cultural footprints left by the British Empire. But let's save more of that for another day. For now, just remember that behind every Victorian label lies a story brimming with more twists and turns than your favorite historical drama. While Victoria's reign had its fair share of grandeur and gloom, one event that cemented her era as the pinnacle of industrial prowess was the Great Exhibition of 1851, or as some might cheekily call it, Albert's Big Day Out. Picture this, a sprawling glass palace right in the middle of Hyde Park, known as the Crystal Palace. It was like an architectural selfie, capturing the ambition and audacity of the era. For just 1 shilling, the price of admission, you could stroll through this 990,000 square foot marvel, ogling over 100,000 exhibits from around the globe. In today's money, the total cost of the exhibition was about £17 million, a hefty sum even by today's standards. But hey, you can't put a price on progress, right? The brainchild of Prince Albert, this World's Fair was meant to showcase Britain's industrial dominance, but it didn't come without its hiccups. For starters, building a massive greenhouse in the middle of London was no small feat. The original design was more convoluted than a Victorian corset, and let's just say the engineers sweat more than the Queen's corgis in a heatwave. The Crystal Palace was a marvel, with 293,655 panes of glass, but it also resembled a giant greenhouse, which meant it could get toasty. During one particularly warm spell, the temperature inside soared to a sweltering 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine the exhibitors in full Victorian garb, looking like they'd just run a marathon through a sauna. Despite these minor issues, the exhibition was a smashing success, attracting over 6 million visitors in just a few months. That's roughly a third of Britain's population at the time, a staggering testament to its allure. It wasn't just about British brilliance, though. The exhibition was a global affair, with contributions from across Europe, the Americas, and beyond. There were American reapers, Indian silks, and even a giant diamond from the British colony in India, the Koh-i-Noor, which, though it glittered under the Crystal Palace's lights, also highlighted the darker side of imperialism, a jewel that symbolized both wealth and wrenching colonial histories. Now, the Great Exhibition wasn't just about showing off shiny new toys. It was a statement, a flex, if you will, a declaration that Britain was at the pinnacle of industrial and imperial power. But this display of might didn't escape the scrutiny of other world powers who were watching like hawks. The message was clear. Britain was the place where steam and steel reigned supreme. The rest of the world was left to play catch-up in a race that would spur innovations, but also rivalries that shaped the global landscape. Fast forward to 1876, and we find ourselves in the midst of another grand title game. Queen Victoria, already secure on her British throne, was about to add a new jewel to her crown, figuratively, of course. Enter the title of Empress of India. Now, if the British Empire were a game of Risk, India was the territory everyone wanted to hold. It wasn't just a land of spices and silks. It was the linchpin of British economic power, a fact not lost on the savvy Queen and her advisors. But the title of Empress wasn't just handed over like a participation trophy. It was a calculated move by Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, who recognized that the British crown needed a boost in its symbolic power over its most prized possession. In the cutthroat game of 19th century politics, this was the ultimate power play. Yet, for Victoria, the coronation as Empress of India wasn't exactly a smooth ride. The move was met with more than a little resistance back home, particularly from those who saw it as an unnecessary glorification of imperial ambition. And let's face it, the British public wasn't too thrilled about footing the bill for more pomp and circumstance. The 1877 Delhi Durbar, where the title was proclaimed, was an opulent affair that underscored the British Raj's grip over the subcontinent. However, Victoria herself was notably absent from the festivities. Instead, she was represented by the Viceroy of India, who performed the ceremonial tasks while Victoria remained in England. Her absence, a stark reminder of the physical and emotional distance between the British monarchy and its Indian subjects. Economically, India was the crown jewel in the British diadem, contributing massively to the empire's wealth. By the late 1800s, India was a key supplier of raw materials like cotton, silk, and tea, and a valuable market for British manufactured goods. The title of Empress was more than ceremonial. It was a nod to the economic leverage India provided, which in turn funded Britain's industrial might. Yet, beneath the glittering veneer of empire lay a web of exploitation and control. India's industries were often stifled to benefit British manufacturers, and its people were subjected to the whims of colonial rule. The 1878 famine, which claimed the lives of millions, was exacerbated by British policies that prioritized profit over people. This was no fairy tale. It was a brutal reality where the romance of empire was marred by harsh truths. Victoria's new title, while grand, couldn't mask the complexities and contradictions of imperial rule. The Empress of India symbolized the zenith of British imperial power, but it also highlighted the tensions and inequalities that would eventually unravel the empire. As we continue to explore the legacy of Queen Victoria, remember that behind every grand title and glittering exhibition lies a story of ambition, power, and a world forever changed by the indelible mark of history. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricacies of Victoria's reign and the world she helped shape. Now, let's pivot from grand titles and opulent ceremonies to the gritty reality of the British Empire's most prized possession, India. Here, the romance of empire met the grimy truth of colonial rule, like a glossy travel brochure hiding the potholes and stray dogs. Queen Victoria herself had a fascination with India that could rival a binge-watcher's obsession with the latest historical drama. She was enchanted by its culture, languages, and art, even learning Hindustani from her Indian servant Abdul Karim, who became her close confidant. But make no mistake, the relationship between Britain and India was no fairy tale. To get a real sense of the British Raj, we must start with the 1857 Indian Rebellion, often referred to as the First War of Independence by Indian historians. This was no minor skirmish, folks. It was a full-blown uprising that had the British Empire trembling in its polished boots. The spark, a seemingly small but incendiary issue involving new rifle cartridges rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, taboo for Hindu and Muslim soldiers, respectively. The British, in their infinite wisdom, overlooked this cultural faux pas, leading to a mutiny that rapidly escalated into a widespread revolt. The rebellion was a chaotic, brutal affair lasting over a year, from May 1857 to June 1858. It stretched across northern and central India, engulfing key cities like Delhi, Kanpur, and Lucknow in flames of insurrection. For the British, it was a nightmare scenario. Hundreds of European civilians were killed, while the rebels gained control of vast territories. But let's not romanticize the rebellion too much. It was a patchwork of grievances rather than a unified national movement. The British, ever the masters of spin, quickly dubbed it a mutiny, downplaying its scale and significance to reassure the folks back home. And suppress it they did, with a vengeance that would make even a Game of Thrones battle scene look tame. The British response was brutal and swift, characterized by mass executions, summary trials, and widespread reprisals. The Siege of Delhi, a pivotal moment in the conflict, saw British forces reclaim the city after months of grueling combat, leaving behind a trail of devastation. Once peace was restored, if you could call it that, the British government decided that the East India Company had done enough damage. In a move that was part punishment, part pragmatism, the Crown took direct control of India in 1858, with Victoria crowned Empress a few years later. It was official. The sun never set on the British Empire, but it sure cast some long shadows. The media of the day played a crucial role in shaping public perception of these events, often painting the British as gallant heroes quelling a barbaric uprising. Newspapers were the 19th century equivalent of social media, with sensationalized headlines and lurid tales flying off the presses faster than you could say fake news. The Times of London, for instance, published vivid accounts of atrocities committed by rebels, fueling public outrage and justifying the harsh retribution that followed. Yet behind the dramatic headlines lay a more complex reality, one of economic exploitation, cultural insensitivity, and mounting resentment. This brings us to the absurdities of colonial administration, a system that was as bloated and inefficient as it was oppressive. Imagine a bureaucracy so convoluted that it made the British postal system look like a model of efficiency. The British Raj was a patchwork quilt of princely states, direct British rule and protectorates, each with its own set of rules and regulations. It was a logistical nightmare, but one that allowed the British to maintain a stranglehold on power while exploiting India's vast resources. Economically, the British presence in India was a classic tale of give and take, except the giving was mostly one-sided. India supplied raw materials like cotton, silk, and tea, which were shipped to Britain to fuel its industrial boom. In return, India became a dumping ground for British manufactured goods, stifling local industries and artisans. The economic policies were so skewed that by the end of the 19th century, India was one of the largest importers of British textiles, a bitter irony considering it had been a global leader in textile production before British intervention. But the absurdity didn't stop at economics. The romanticized portrayal of the British Raj, with its grand palaces and lavish durbars, conveniently glossed over the harsh realities faced by ordinary Indians. Famine, poverty, and disease were rampant, exacerbated by British policies that prioritized profit over people. And while the British were busy building railways and telegraph lines, ostensibly for the benefit of the Indian populace, these projects primarily served to tighten colonial control and facilitate resource extraction. Yet, despite all this, the myth of the benevolent British Raj persists in popular imagination, like a nostalgic sepia-toned photograph that hides the cracks and creases. The allure of empire, with its exoticism and grandeur, is a powerful narrative that often overshadows the gritty truth. So next time someone waxes lyrical about the jewel in the crown, remember that it was a jewel bought at a high price, one paid in blood, sweat, and tears. As we dig deeper into Victoria's legacy, it's crucial to peel back the layers of myth and examine the raw, unvarnished history beneath. The Empress of India was more than just a title. It was a symbol of imperial ambition and the complexities of a world caught between tradition and modernity, oppression and progress. And as Victoria's reign continued, so did the saga of the British Empire, a story that would shape the destinies of millions and leave an indelible mark on the course of history. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel this intricate tapestry, exploring the intersections of power, culture, and identity in a world on the brink of change. Before we dive into the latter years of Queen Victoria's reign, there's a certain image we need to address. The widowed queen, cloaked in black like a perpetual storm cloud. Following the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, in 1861, Victoria's wardrobe took a decidedly Gothic turn. She was the original fashion influencer of mourning attire, setting a trend that went way beyond a mere phase. For nearly 40 years, she remained in mourning, her black dress wardrobe larger than life and longer than some marriages. But let's be real, the woman had a flair for the dramatic, and her grief became a part of her public persona, as did the nickname, the Widow of Windsor. Of course, this wasn't just about fashion. It was a profound expression of her personal loss. Albert had been her confidant, partner in crime, and the yin to her ruling yang. When he passed, reportedly from typhoid fever, Victoria was heartbroken. She withdrew from public life, retreating to her royal residences, like Balmoral in Scotland, where she surrounded herself with reminders of Albert. She even went as far as to have his clothes laid out daily, as if he might saunter in at any moment. Now, if that's not commitment, I don't know what is. But in the midst of this somber sartorial saga, a new character entered the stage. Abdul Karim, an Indian servant who would become one of Victoria's closest confidants. Talk about an unexpected plot twist. Abdul Karim started as a humble clerk, but swiftly became the Queen's Munshi, or teacher, introducing her to Urdu and the customs of India. Their friendship was as scandalous as it was unlikely, sending shockwaves through the British court that could rival a good Downton Abbey subplot. The court, predictably, was apoplectic. Here was a man of Indian descent, not only mingling with the Queen but sharing personal conversations, dining at her table, and horror of horrors, having influence. Karim even received prestigious titles and gifts, including a cottage on the Isle of Wight. The British aristocracy, already skeptical of Victoria's fascination with India, saw red. For them, this was more than just a breach of protocol. It was an affront to their carefully calibrated social hierarchy. Yet Victoria was unfazed. She defended Karim fiercely, much to the chagrin of her advisers and family. In her eyes, Karim provided a connection to India that was genuine and unfiltered, unlike the sanitized reports she received from colonial administrators. Their relationship highlighted Victoria's complex view of her empire, an empire she adored, but whose administration she often found frustratingly opaque. While Victoria was busy shaking up courtly norms and redefining royal friendships, the world around her was shrinking, thanks in no small part to technological marvels like the telegraph. By the late 19th century, the telegraph was the Victorian equivalent of a smartphone, albeit with a few more wires and a lot less Candy Crush. The first successful transatlantic telegraph cable was laid in 1866, effectively turning the vast oceans into a mere inconvenience for global communication. Suddenly, the empire was connected in ways previously unimaginable, with messages zipping across continents in hours rather than weeks. This technological leap was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, it allowed for more efficient governance, as colonial administrators could now telegraph London for instructions faster than you could say Queen and country. On the other hand, it also meant that news of revolts, famines, and all manner of colonial misconduct reached the British public with unprecedented speed. The empire might have spanned the globe, but now it was communicatively within arm's reach. And let's not forget the economic implications. The telegraph was a boon for trade, enabling businesses to operate with a level of agility that would make even the most seasoned stockbroker nod in approval. By the 1870s, Britain was a world leader in telegraph technology, with over 30,000 miles of cable linking its far-flung territories. It was a marvel of modernity, a testament to human ingenuity, and a stark reminder that the empire's grip on power was as much about innovation as it was about military might. But this wasn't the only advancement changing the landscape. Railways were crisscrossing the British Isles, and the empire faster than you could lose your luggage on a modern-day commute. By the end of Victoria's reign, Britain had laid down over 20,000 miles of track, while India boasted more than 25,000 miles, connecting major cities and facilitating the flow of goods and people. Railways became the arteries of the empire, pumping economic lifeblood from one corner of the globe to another. Yet, in the midst of these triumphs, Victoria's reign faced political challenges that were as knotty as a Victorian corset. The late 19th century was a time of reform and upheaval, with issues like Irish Home Rule, labour rights, and women's suffrage bubbling away like a political stew. The monarchy, while largely symbolic, couldn't entirely escape the heat. Victoria herself was often at odds with her prime ministers, from Disraeli to Gladstone, as they navigated the choppy waters of a changing world. Victoria's later years were a paradox. She was a symbol of continuity in an era of rapid change, a living relic of a bygone age, even as she presided over the dawn of the modern world. Her empire was vast, yet fraught with contradictions, an empire that boasted both the grandeur of imperial palaces and the grim reality of colonial exploitation. As we continue this journey through Victoria's reign, remember that her story is not just about a woman in a black dress or a queen with a penchant for exotic friendships. It's a story of an empire at its zenith, grappling with the complexities of power, culture, and identity in a world that was hurtling toward the 20th century. So, stay tuned, because there's more to come in this tale of royal intrigue, technological triumphs, and the indelible mark of history. And so, as we chart the final chapter of Queen Victoria's reign, it's time to dive into the myth versus the reality of the grandmother of Europe. This pint-sized monarch, barely 5 feet tall, left a footprint larger than life itself. Her legacy is like a Victorian novel, filled with sweeping grandeur, hidden scandals, and more plot twists than a Dickensian serial. Let's peel back the layers of this historical onion, shall we? First, the myth. Queen Victoria, with her brood of 9 children, became the matriarch of European royalty. Her descendants sat on the thrones of Germany, Russia, Greece, Romania, and more, earning her that affectionate, though slightly misleading, title. She was like the original LinkedIn influencer, connecting royal houses with the finesse of a social media guru. But here's the kicker. Family ties didn't exactly guarantee peace. The outbreak of World War I, just 13 years after her death, turned her grand familial network into a house of cards. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and King George V of Britain, first cousins who ended up on opposite sides. Talk about awkward family reunions. Now, let's contrast that mythic image with the stark realities of her imperial reign. While Victoria was busy playing royal matchmaker, the British Empire was expanding like a hot air balloon on a windy day. By the time she passed away in 1901, the empire covered a quarter of the globe and included nearly 400 million people. That's a lot of subjects for one monarch, especially one who spent much of her reign in deep mourning. But the empire wasn't all pomp and circumstance. Underneath the gilded facade lay a darker narrative of imperialism, economic exploitation, cultural repression, and let's not forget the occasional military intervention when negotiations got a bit too tedious. Take India, for instance, the so-called jewel in the crown. While the British were busy laying down railways and celebrating their civilizing mission, millions of Indians were struggling under the weight of discriminatory policies and famines exacerbated by colonial mismanagement. The 1876-1878 famine alone claimed between 5 and 10 million lives, a stark reminder that the empire's shine often obscured its shadows. Economically, Victoria's Britain was a juggernaut, cranking out more than half of the world's iron and coal by the 1860s. The empire facilitated a global trade network that would make even the most ambitious Silicon Valley startup blush. Yet this economic miracle was built on the backs of colonies stripped of their resources and markets flooded with British goods. It's the kind of trade balance that would make an economist weep, or at least reach for a strong cup of tea. Politically, Victoria's reign was a roller coaster. She was a constitutional monarch, meaning her power was more symbolic than legislative. But don't let that fool you into thinking she was a mere figurehead. Victoria had strong opinions and wasn't shy about letting her prime ministers know, especially when they dared to disagree with her. Her correspondence with the likes of Lord Melbourne, Benjamin Disraeli, and William Gladstone reveals a queen who was as engaged in politics as she was in her extensive family tree. Yet, despite her political acumen, Victoria was often caught between tradition and progress. She was a symbol of an era defined by industrial innovation and social reform. Yet she remained a staunch conservative, wary of movements like women's suffrage and Irish Home Rule. It's a paradox worthy of a Shakespearean drama, a queen whose reign embodied modernity while she herself embodied the old guard. So, what do we make of the legacy left by this diminutive dynamo? Victoria's impact is as sprawling as the empire she ruled. Her era saw the rise of the middle class, the spread of democratic ideals, and the dawn of a globalized world. The Victorian Age, as it's often called, was a time of contradictions, unprecedented progress alongside persistent inequality. It was a period that celebrated both the power of invention and the pitfalls of unchecked expansion. Culturally, the Victorian influence is still felt today. From the Gothic revival architecture dotting cityscapes to the literary giants like Charles Dickens and the Bronte sisters who continue to capture imaginations, the era's cultural output was nothing short of prolific. Even the English language bears her mark, with words like Victorian, conjuring images of frilly frocks, stiff upper lips, and a peculiar obsession with table manners. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Victoria's legacy is the narrative itself, the story of a queen who ascended the throne as a teenager, ruled for over 63 years, and became a symbol of an empire that, for better or worse, reshaped the world. Her life was a masterclass in the art of balancing public duty and private grief, a reminder that even the most iconic figures are, at their core, profoundly human. As we wrap up this historical saga, let's take a moment to reflect on the ironies that defined Victoria's reign. She was a queen who wielded immense influence, yet struggled to reconcile her personal beliefs with the changing tides of her time. Her empire was a bastion of civilization, but also a vehicle for exploitation. And while she is remembered as the grandmother of Europe, her legacy is as much about the complexities of imperial ambition as it is about familial bonds. So there you have it, the life and times of Queen Victoria, a monarch whose story is as multifaceted as the era she helped define. As you drift off to sleep with these tales of empire and intrigue swirling in your mind, remember that history, much like life, is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, myths and realities, woven together into the rich, complex fabric of our past. In the bustling crossroads of ancient Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers performed their watery tango, there stood a city called Ashur. Now, don't let its modest beginnings fool you. Ashur started out as a small city-state around 2500 BCE, but it had ambitions bigger than a teenager with a new driver's license. Nestled on the banks of the Tigris, Ashur wasn't just a geographical blip. It had aspirations to become the center of an empire that would eventually make Game of Thrones look like a neighborhood block party. The early Assyrians were a motley crew of Semitic-speaking folks who figured out that the key to success was not just in agriculture or trade, but in a little something called organized violence. They were like the overachieving kid in class, who not only did all the homework, but also figured out how to do everyone else's, and still had time to develop a new calendar system. They were innovative, if you could call developing siege warfare tactics innovation. But hey, give them credit. It's not every day you meet a civilization that pioneered the battering ram. Talk about a smashing success. Ashur's location was no accident. Situated at a prime spot for trade routes, it was like the ancient equivalent of a prime real estate listing. This city was a hub of activity, where goods, ideas, and the occasional caravan of camels would all converge. The Assyrians capitalized on this, turning Ashur into a bustling marketplace. They were trading grain, textiles, and enough tin to make a Bronze Age hipster jealous. It was a place of commerce, culture, and conquest, a trifecta that would set the stage for what was to come. Now, let's talk about the original influencer of the Assyrian realm, Shamshi-Adad I, who reigned from 1813 to 1781 BCE. This guy was a real mover and shaker, a kind of ancient Tony Stark who didn't need an Iron Man suit to get things done. He expanded Assyria's territory like he was playing a game of Risk and had no intention of losing. Under his rule, the Assyrians were not just sticking to their corner of the map. They were branching out, annexing territories, and building an empire one conquest at a time. Shamshi-Adad I was the kind of leader who didn't just talk about making Assyria great. He did it, and with considerable flair. Of course, building an empire isn't all sunshine and chariot races. It's hard work, and sometimes the politics of keeping everyone happy was like trying to juggle flaming swords while blindfolded. The Assyrians were strategic in their alliances, sometimes through marriage, sometimes through a friendly, or not so friendly, bit of warfare. And while they were at it, they also had to deal with the ever-present threat of neighboring states who would gladly take them down a peg or two. It was a balancing act that required as much cunning as it did brute strength. Despite these challenges, the Assyrians were not just about wielding iron fists in velvet gloves. They were also patrons of the arts and architecture. Now, before you conjure images of an ancient Louvre, let's be realistic. They didn't have time to dabble in abstract art when they were busy trying to conquer the known world. But they did build impressive temples and ziggurats dedicated to their gods, with Asher, their chief deity, being the headliner. These structures were less about aesthetics and more about making a statement, an ancient billboard of sorts that screamed, "We're here, we're powerful, get used to it." Their innovations weren't limited to architecture and warfare. The Assyrians were also ahead of their time in administration and governance. They developed a system of provinces, with each one governed by officials who answered to the king. Think of it as an ancient form of federalism, minus the debates over state versus federal rights. This was a way to maintain control over their vast and diverse empire, ensuring that even the furthest reaches knew who was boss. But let's not wax too lyrical about the Assyrians without acknowledging the less glamorous realities. The empire was built on the backs of countless laborers, many of whom were prisoners of war or enslaved people. The Assyrians were experts in the fine art of subjugation, and they weren't shy about it. Their inscriptions proudly chronicled their victories and the subduing of enemies, in what can only be described as the ancient equivalent of a viral tweet thread, boasting of their latest exploits. Yet, for all its might and majesty, Assyria's beginnings were humble, and its future was anything but certain. It was a young empire with a lot to prove, and the world was full of rivals ready to test its mettle. Asher may have started as a small city-state dreaming of greatness, but it was set on a path of expansion that would see it rise to become one of the most formidable forces of the ancient world. Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started, and it's going to be a wild ride. From its earliest days, the Assyrian Empire was a testament to ambition, innovation, and the human penchant for a little bit of organized chaos. Speaking of wild rides, let's fast forward a few hundred years to the 8th century BCE, where we find ourselves staring into the ambitious eyes of Tiglath-Pileser III, a name that could double as a tongue-twister, but instead belonged to a man who twisted the fate of empires. This guy was like the Steve Jobs of the ancient world. He didn't invent the empire, but he sure knew how to upgrade it. He took the Assyrian Empire from a regional heavyweight to a global contender, and he did it with a mix of military genius and a charm that only a despot could pull off. Tiglath-Pileser III wasn't here to play. He was here to win. When he ascended the throne in 745 BCE, the empire was in a bit of a funk, like a once-hot band playing to half-empty arenas. But Tiglath-Pileser wasn't about to let Assyria be yesterday's news. He reorganized the military, transforming it into a well-oiled machine that could conquer with the best of them. He introduced standing armies. Yep, no more waiting for the harvest to finish before you could call up the troops. This meant Assyria had a full-time professional army ready to rock and roll at a moment's notice. And rock they did, using innovative tactics that would make even Sun Tzu take notes. Now, Tiglath-Pileser III was nothing if not efficient. His campaigns were swift and decisive, expanding the empire's territory like he was collecting properties in Monopoly. He conquered parts of modern-day Iran, Syria, and Lebanon, and slapped the Assyrian brand on them faster than you can say world domination. But it wasn't all about brute force. Tiglath-Pileser knew the importance of good PR. He was a master at propaganda, carefully crafting his image as the king who brought order and stability, whether his new subjects wanted it or not. And let's not forget his administrative prowess. Tiglath-Pileser revamped the empire's bureaucracy, centralizing power like a boss. He divided the empire into provinces, each with a governor who reported directly to him. Think of it as Assyria's version of a corporate restructuring. This system ensured that even the most distant parts of the empire were under tight control, and it allowed Tiglath-Pileser to keep a pulse on his sprawling domain. He was the original micromanager, and he had the receipts to prove it. But Tiglath-Pileser's rule was more than just conquest and control. He had a thing for infrastructure. Roads, bridges, and fortifications were his jam. These projects weren't just about looking good. They were strategic investments that facilitated trade and troop movements. It was the ancient equivalent of building highways and airports, ensuring that Assyria could move goods and soldiers with speed and efficiency. His obsession with big walls and bigger egos became a hallmark of his reign. In fact, if walls could talk, they'd probably say, "Tiglath was here." Enters Sargon II, the man who picked up the baton from Tiglath-Pileser and decided to run a marathon. Sargon II came to power in 722 BCE and immediately made it clear that he wasn't content with merely maintaining the status quo. He was like the ambitious intern who not only wants to make partner, but wants to rewrite the company's mission statement while he's at it. Under his rule, the empire reached its apex, and Sargon II became synonymous with Assyria's golden age. Sargon II was a master of both warfare and diplomacy. He knew when to brandish the sword and when to extend the olive branch. His military campaigns were legendary, and his victories were celebrated in lavish inscriptions that boasted of his prowess. He conquered the kingdom of Israel, subduing rebellious vassals and expanding Assyria's influence across the Middle East. But he also knew the value of alliances, forming strategic partnerships that bolstered his power and secured his borders. He was the kind of leader who could charm your socks off while simultaneously annexing your territory. Yet, for all his military might, Sargon II was also an empire builder in the literal sense. He founded the city of Dur-Sharukin, which means Sargon's fortress. This wasn't just any city. It was a testament to Assyrian architectural prowess, complete with grand palaces, temples, and, of course, imposing walls. Construction took 10 years and involved tens of thousands of workers, a massive undertaking that underscored Sargon's desire to leave a lasting legacy. But even ancient urban planning wasn't immune to the whims of fate. Sargon died in battle before he could enjoy his new digs, proving that even emperors can't predict life's little ironies. Economically, the Assyrian Empire under Sargon II was a powerhouse. Its wealth was built on trade, tribute, and a little old-fashioned plunder. The empire's vast network of roads facilitated commerce across its territories, moving everything from grain to textiles. The centralized administration ensured that taxes and tributes flowed steadily to the imperial coffers, funding further conquests and grandiose building projects. Assyria's economic engine was firing on all cylinders, and the empire basked in the glow of prosperity. But let's not pretend it was all sunshine and roses. The Assyrian Empire, for all its achievements, was built on a foundation of blood and toil. Conquests were brutal affairs, and the subjugation of peoples was often accompanied by horrific violence. The empire's vassals lived under constant threat, knowing that rebellion would be met with swift and merciless retribution. The Assyrians were masters of psychological warfare, using fear as a tool to maintain control. Their inscriptions didn't just boast of victories. They detailed the gruesome fates of their enemies in a kind of ancient horror show designed to keep potential rebels in check. So, while Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II might be remembered as visionary leaders who transformed Assyria into a superpower, they were also the architects of an empire that thrived on conquest and control. Their legacies are a testament to the complexities of power, how it can build and destroy in equal measure. As we take a breather from this historical roller coaster, remember that the Assyrian Empire was as much a story of ambition and innovation as it was a tale of tyranny and terror. And although the empire stood tall under Tiglath-Pileser and Sargon, the seeds of its eventual fall were already being sown, waiting for the right moment to sprout. But that's a story for another day, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the rise and fall of one of history's most formidable empires. Now, as the Assyrian Empire strutted its stuff under the likes of Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II, it wasn't just the kings and their cronies living the high life. Nope, The empire was a complex web of social and economic dynamics that made a modern-day corporate merger look like child's play. Picture this. Elaborate palaces towering over bustling markets where the common folk toiled away, juxtaposing the grandeur of imperial ambition with the gritty reality of everyday existence. Talk about the ultimate upstairs-downstairs drama. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of the Assyrian economy, which was the ancient equivalent of a multi-level marketing scheme, minus the cheesy motivational seminars. At its core was agriculture, which was a bit like the empire's bread and butter, literally. The fertile lands along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers provided a bounty of grains, pulses, and let's not forget that staple of ancient banquets, beer. The Assyrians were not just feeding their own armies. They were exporting surplus to neighboring regions, making them the original farm-to-table enthusiasts, albeit with a bit more conquest involved. But this wasn't some idyllic pastoral scene straight out of a romantic painting. The work was backbreaking, and the labor force was often composed of enslaved people and prisoners of war. The empire's agricultural might was built on the backs of those who had little choice in the matter, a sobering reminder that one civilization's prosperity often comes at the expense of another's freedom. The Assyrian economy was a well-oiled machine, but like any engine, it ran on fuel, human fuel in this case. Trade was another cornerstone of their economic prowess. The Assyrians were savvy merchants, dealing in everything from textiles and metals to precious stones. Cities like Nineveh and Asher were bustling trade hubs, where caravans came and went, laden with goods from as far afield as Egypt and Anatolia. Picture the Silk Road, but with a bit more sand and a few more camels. It was a high-stakes game, and the Assyrians played it with aplomb, establishing trade routes that would make Amazon blush. Now, if you think the Assyrians just sat back and let the money roll in, think again. They were the ultimate micromanagers, keeping a tight grip on trade by imposing taxes and tariffs that would make a modern tax collector giddy. This wasn't just about lining the royal coffers, it was about control. By regulating trade, they ensured that the empire's wealth was centralized, and any potential rivals were kept in check. It was a classic case of keeping your friends close and your purse strings closer. But let's not gloss over the role of slavery in all this. The Assyrians were equal opportunity oppressors, enslaving people from across their empire to build their monumental architecture and work their fields. These weren't just any structures. These were grandiose statements of power, like the palace of Sargon II at Dur-Sharukin, which stretched over 23 acres, an ancient McMansion if ever there was one. And while the elites enjoyed the fruits of empire, the enslaved toiled away, an enduring testament to the harsh realities that lurked behind the empire's glorious facade. So, what was life like for the average Assyrian? Well, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The common folk lived in modest homes, clustered together in neighborhoods that were often as cramped as they were lively. Social life revolved around the family unit and local community, with simple pleasures like communal feasts and religious festivals providing a welcome respite from the daily grind. It was a life of hard work and simple joys, far removed from the opulence of the royal court. Yet, for all the empire's might, the Assyrians were not immune to the everyday trials and tribulations that have bedeviled humanity since time immemorial. Droughts, floods, and the occasional bout of plague were constant reminders that even the most powerful empire could be brought to its knees by forces beyond its control. It was a delicate balance, maintaining an empire that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, and one that required as much cunning as it did courage. So, there you have it, a glimpse into the social and economic dynamics of the Assyrian Empire, where the grandeur of imperial ambition met the gritty reality of everyday life. It was a world of stark contrasts, where the splendor of palaces masked the toil of the masses, and where the pursuit of power was tempered by the ever-present specter of uncertainty. As we continue our journey through the annals of Assyrian history, remember that behind every grand narrative lies a tapestry of human experiences, each thread woven together to create the rich and complex story of an empire that was as formidable as it was fragile. Stay tuned, because this saga is far from over. The next chapter promises even more intrigue, as we delve into the forces that would eventually topple this mighty empire and change the course of history forever. Now, as we venture deeper into the annals of Assyrian history, let's peek behind the curtain of this once mighty empire's decline and inevitable downfall. The Assyrians, for all their martial prowess and penchant for grandiose architecture, eventually found themselves tangled in a web of overextension, internal strife, and external pressures that even their mighty battering rams couldn't smash through. First up, let's tackle the elephant in the room, the empire's sheer size. By the time we hit the 7th century BCE, Assyria was like a high-maintenance celebrity juggling too many projects. They'd stretched their empire from the Mediterranean to parts of modern-day Iran, which sounds impressive until you try managing it. Imagine running a marathon while spinning plates and reciting the alphabet backwards. That's the kind of logistical nightmare they were dealing with. Keeping this sprawling empire in check required an administrative prowess that even their vaunted micromanagement couldn't entirely handle. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well. Overextension wasn't just about geography, it was also about resources. The Assyrian Empire was like an ancient version of a gas-guzzling SUV, drinking from the well of its own prosperity faster than it could refill. Maintaining those massive armies and monumental building projects wasn't cheap. It required an endless influx of tribute, taxes, and the occasional plunder. When the tributary states started feeling the pinch and decided they'd rather keep their hardened wealth, the empire found itself strapped for cash. It's the classic tale of biting off more than you can chew, with a side of imperial indigestion. But don't be fooled into thinking it was just the size of the empire that did them in. Internally, the Assyrian Empire was starting to resemble a dysfunctional family Thanksgiving dinner, full of bickering, backstabbing, and the occasional power struggle. These were not the days of Tiglath-Pileser III or Sargon II, who ruled with iron fists and visionary zeal. By the late 7th century BCE, the empire was rocked by internal rebellions and coups. Each new ruler clinging to power like it was the last slice of pie. And let's not forget the royal succession drama, where the throne was more a game of musical chairs than a stable seat of power. One notable hiccup was the reign of Ashurbanipal, the last of the great Assyrian kings. He was a man of many talents, scholar, warrior, and obsessive book collector. His library at Nineveh was the stuff of legend, housing thousands of clay tablets that would later become a treasure trove for historians. But all those dusty tomes couldn't save him from the realities of empire. His reign saw the height of Assyrian cultural achievement, but it was also a time of intense internal strife. The empire was beginning to fray at the edges, with subject peoples itching to throw off Assyrian dominance. And then there were the external pressures. The Babylonians, Medes, Scythians, and Cimmerians were like rival bands eyeing the top spot on the charts. They sensed weakness in the Assyrian ranks and weren't about to let the opportunity slip by. Babylon, under the leadership of Nabopolassar, was particularly keen to shake off its Assyrian overlords. In a series of rebellious fits and starts, Babylon began to forge alliances with the Medes, who occupied what is now Iran. In 612 BCE, they joined forces and laid siege to Nineveh, the jewel of the Assyrian Empire. The city's fall was as dramatic as any Hollywood blockbuster, complete with fiery destruction and a cast of thousands. The fall of Nineveh was a pivotal moment, but it wasn't the end of the Assyrian story. Even after their capital lay in ruins, the Assyrians clung to power, retreating to Haran and then Carchemish. It was a bit like watching a heavyweight boxer refuse to throw in the towel, even as they're battered from all sides. The final blow came in 609 BCE, when the Babylonians and Medes delivered a knockout punch, effectively ending the Assyrian Empire's reign. And just like that, a civilization that had once ruled with an iron grip was reduced to a footnote in the annals of history. Now, here's where we debunk a few myths. The downfall of the Assyrian Empire is often romanticized as a tale of hubris and inevitable decline. While there's some truth to that, many empires do sow the seeds of their own destruction. the reality is more complex. This wasn't simply a case of karma catching up with a brutal regime. It was a confluence of factors: economic strain, political infighting, and external aggression. The Assyrians didn't just wake up one day and decide to exit stage left. They were pushed, shoved, and eventually toppled by forces both within and beyond their control. And let's not forget the human element in all this. Empires are built and destroyed by people, not just grand strategies and military might. The Assyrians were a people like any other, striving for greatness, but also grappling with the same forces that challenge us today: ambition, greed, resilience, and the desire for something more. Their story isn't just a cautionary tale about the dangers of overreach. It's a reminder of the complexities of power and the ever-changing tapestry of human history. So, as we draw closer to the end of this chapter, remember that the Assyrians were more than just conquerors with a penchant for big walls and bigger egos. They were a civilization that left an indelible mark on the world, from their innovations in warfare to their contributions to art and culture. And while their empire may have crumbled, their legacy endures, a testament to the heights and depths of human ambition. But don't tune out just yet. There's still more to this saga, as we explore the aftermath of Assyria's fall and the new powers that rose from its ashes. Stay tuned, because history never truly ends. It just keeps on evolving, one bit of chaos at a time. With the rise of new powers from Assyria's ashes, the world saw the stage set for the likes of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Renaissance. Yes, folks, the curtain may have dropped on the Assyrians, but the show went on. Cue the Babylonians, who took center stage like a rock band filling in for a superstar that just cancelled. They inherited a world that had been fundamentally shaped by the Assyrians, whether they liked it or not. So, what did the Assyrians leave behind in their imperial wake? Let's not sugarcoat it. They were the ancient world's version of a hurricane. But instead of leaving behind wreckage, they left a legacy that would influence civilizations for centuries to come. For starters, their innovations in warfare and administration were like the blueprints for empires that followed. They perfected the art of siege warfare, and their tactics were studied by military minds long after their empire had crumbled. These were the folks who turned the battering ram into a must-have for any aspiring conqueror. And let's not forget their contributions to governance. The Assyrians pioneered the division of their empire into provinces, each led by a governor who answered directly to the king. It was a system that kept things running smoothly, or as smoothly as you can when you're trying to manage a sprawling empire. This model of centralized power and local governance was adopted by later empires, including the Persians and Romans. It was the ancient precursor to the idea of federalism, without the endless debates on state versus federal rights. Culturally, the Assyrians were no slouches either. While they were busy conquering, they also collected knowledge like it was going out of style. The library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh housed thousands of tablets, including some of the earliest works of literature, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. This library was a treasure trove for historians and archaeologists, revealing insights into ancient Mesopotamian culture, science, and mythology. It's a bit like finding a dusty old box of mixtapes in your attic, only to discover there the original recordings of Beethoven. Sure, the Assyrians weren't exactly known for their warm and fuzzy diplomacy, but their knack for cultural assimilation can't be ignored. As they expanded, they absorbed the cultural practices of conquered peoples, creating a melting pot of traditions that enriched their own society. This cultural syncretism laid the groundwork for later civilizations, proving that even empires built on conquest can contribute to something greater than the sum of their parts. Now, let's fast forward to the modern era and the way we view the Assyrians today. Once relegated to the dusty shelves of history, they've found a new life in popular culture. They're like the original bad boys of the ancient world, starring in movies, TV shows, and video games. From The Mummy to Assassin's Creed, the Assyrians have been portrayed as everything from ruthless conquerors to mystical sorcerers. It's as if they've been given a Hollywood makeover, complete with CGI battles and dramatic soundtracks. But while Hollywood may revel in their epic tales of conquest, it often glosses over the gritty realities. The truth is, the Assyrians were as much the architects of their own downfall as they were the builders of their empire. Their legacy is a complex tapestry of innovation, brutality, and cultural achievement, a reminder that history is never as black and white as it seems. It's the ultimate paradox, an empire that was both a beacon of progress and a harbinger of destruction. In the end, the Assyrian story is a cautionary tale about the perils of overreach and the impermanence of power. It's a reminder that even the mightiest empires can crumble, leaving behind only echoes of their former glory. Yet, it's also a testament to the enduring impact of human ambition and ingenuity. The Assyrians may have been fierce conquerors, but they were also pioneers in governance, culture, and military strategy. Their story is a rich tapestry of human experience, a testament to both the heights of human achievement and the depths of human folly. So, as we wrap up this historical journey, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons of the Assyrian Empire. Let's remember that behind every grand narrative lies a myriad of human stories, each one contributing to the complex tapestry of history. The Assyrians may have fallen, but their legacy endures, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity and the ever-evolving dance of civilization. And while we may never truly unravel the full mystery of their rise and fall, one thing is certain. Their story will continue to captivate our imaginations, reminding us of the wonders and the warnings inherent in the annals of history. In a land where the concept of time wasn't just a way to make you late for brunch, but a cosmic force that governed the universe, the Mayans stood out like a mathlete at a jock convention. While most of the world was still trying to figure out which end of the stick made the fire go, the Mayans were busy plotting out the heavens with an astronomical precision that would make a NASA engineer blush. Their calendar wasn't just a way to keep track of when to plant corn or throw a festival. It was a complex system that intertwined astronomy, mathematics, and mythology with a flair that would put your Google Calendar to shame. Let's start with the long count calendar, because when it comes to Mayan timekeeping, it's the diva of the show. Think of it as the Bay-and-Say of calendars. This system was designed to keep track of longer periods, because apparently tracking months and years was too pedestrian for the Mayans. The long count calendar kicks off from a mythic starting point, August 11, 3114 BCE, a date that's as arbitrary as it is significant. Why that date? Your guess is as good as any, but it's believed to mark the creation of the current world in Mayan mythology. The long count is more than just a count-up. It's a cycle of 5,125, 36 years, which is conveniently the length of a full great cycle. These guys weren't just counting days, they were marking epochs. Now, if you think the long count was a bit much, wait until you hear about the Tzolk'in. This 260-day calendar was like the quirky cousin, combining a 13-day cycle with 20 different glyphs to represent days. Each day had its own name and personality, kind of like a celestial roll call. The Tzolk'in was primarily used for religious and ceremonial events, because nothing says sacred ceremony quite like a cryptic combination of numbers and symbols. It's believed that this cycle was tied to the human gestation period, because who doesn't love a calendar that syncs with pregnancy timelines? Then there's the Harb, the closest thing to a normal calendar in the Mayan world. Composed of 18 months of 20 days each, plus a cheeky little 5-day month known as Wayeb, which was about as popular as a Monday morning. These were nameless days, and considered unlucky, perfect if you wanted to skip work. So, while the Harb rounded out the solar year at 365 days, it left a little wiggle room for those seeking an excuse for a long weekend. The Mayan calendar system is a testament to their skills in astronomy and mathematics. It wasn't just about counting days, but about understanding the cosmic ballet of the stars and planets. They tracked the movements of Venus with a precision that would make modern astronomers sweat, using it to plan wars and peace treaties. Had a beef with your neighbor? Better make sure Venus was in the right phase before you marched over. Let's not ignore the fact that the Mayans managed all of this without telescopes or computers, using only naked-eye observations and a knack for numbers. It's like if Pythagoras and Galileo had a baby and it grew up in a jungle. Their calculations were so precise that when the world didn't end on December 21, 2012, people were genuinely disappointed. The myth of the Mayan apocalypse was more a misinterpretation by modern enthusiasts than any doomsday prophecy. The truth is, the calendar was just rolling over to a new cycle, not unlike your car's odometer hitting 100,000 miles. Not the end of the world, just another day in the cosmic continuum. In the end, the Mayan calendar is a marvel of human ingenuity, a complex tapestry of time that intertwines science and spirituality in a way that modern society can only envy. While we may chuckle at the idea of a calendar that needs a cheat sheet to understand, it's a reminder of a civilization that viewed time not as a linear progression, but as a series of interconnected cycles. They saw the universe in a way that blended the temporal with the eternal, leaving us with a legacy that's as mysterious as it is magnificent. As the rest of the world was still fumbling with sundials and hourglasses, the Mayans had already charted a path through the stars, proving once again that when it comes to understanding the universe, sometimes the ancients had it all figured out. As the Mayans charted their way through the cosmos with a precision that could make even the most organized Virgo envious, their calendars became much more than just fancy timepieces. They were cultural and religious keystones, shaping every facet of Mayan life. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of your smartphone's calendar app, crucial for planning everything from daily chores to grand ceremonies, with a touch more human sacrifice and a lot less color coding. Let's talk about agriculture, the backbone of any civilization worth its salt, or maize in this case. The Mayan calendar was the ultimate agricultural almanac, pinpointing the exact times to plant and harvest crops. This wasn't just about ensuring a bountiful harvest. It was a cosmic dance with the universe. The Mayans believed their agricultural practices were in sync with the divine order, a concept that sounds poetic until you realize that miscalculating the planting season could literally be the end of the world, or at least the end of dinner. But the Mayan calendar wasn't all about the corn and beans. It was also a crucial tool for religious ceremonies, which, spoiler alert, often included human sacrifices. These weren't just gruesome spectacles. They were believed to be essential transactions with the gods to ensure the continuation of the world. The calendar dictated when these sacrifices should happen to maximize their cosmic efficacy. I mean, you wouldn't want to miss the divine deadline, would you? The stakes were as high as they come. No sacrifices, no rain, no crops, no survival. It was a system of checks and balances, Mayan style. Now, fast forward to today, where we obsess over time management apps as if they were the holy grail of productivity. It's not hard to see the parallels. Just like the Mayans, we're convinced that if we can just schedule our lives down to the minute, everything will fall into place. The difference, we might miss a meeting or forget to pick up the dry cleaning. For the Mayans, the consequences of poor time management involved a little more bloodshed and a lot more existential dread. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking the calendar was a democratic tool. It was, in fact, a weapon of power wielded by the elite to maintain control over the masses. The priests and rulers, those in the know, held the keys to this celestial knowledge. It was like having the ultimate cheat sheet for life, and they weren't exactly sharing it freely with the peasants. Need to know when the next solar eclipse will occur, or when to expect a good harvest. Better be in the elite's good graces, because they were the gatekeepers of time itself. This was power, pure and simple, dressed up in the garb of divine wisdom. The calendar's role as a tool of control is a sobering reminder of how knowledge can be used to manipulate, a tale as old as time itself. In Mayan society, the elite's understanding of the calendar and its celestial alignments reinforced their authority, legitimizing their rule as divinely sanctioned. Who's going to argue with a king who claims to have the gods' calendar on his side? It's like trying to argue with someone who has both the receipts and the universe backing them up. Yet, Amid all this, there's an undeniable romance to the Mayan calendar, a testament to humanity's eternal quest to understand our place in the vast cosmos. It's a story of innovation and imagination, of a people who looked up at the stars and saw not chaos, but order and meaning. While the myth of the Mayan apocalypse might have been a modern misinterpretation, it speaks to our continued fascination with cycles and endings, with the idea that time is not just a straight line, but a series of interconnected loops. In the end, the Mayan calendar is a reflection of the human condition, our desire to impose order on chaos, to find meaning in the mundane, to believe that we are part of something greater. It reminds us that time is both a construct and a constant, a way to measure our days and to dream of eternity. As we juggle our own daily schedules, perhaps we can take a leaf out of the Mayans' book or stone tablet, and remember that while time might bind us, it also connects us to the universe and to each other. So, as we continue to delve into the mysteries of the Mayan calendar, let's keep an eye on how this ancient tool not only structured society, but also served as a mirror to the human soul, where the mundane meets the mystical, and time becomes both a chain and a key. Just when you thought the Mayan calendar was all about celestial wonders and cosmic connections, along came the infamous 2012 prophecy that shook the very foundations of modern superstition. December 21, 2012. Remember that date. It was supposed to be the grand finale, the ultimate season finale of Earth, courtesy of a misunderstood Mesoamerican calendar. What happened instead? Humanity rang in the 22nd with nothing more than a collective oops. Turns out, this wasn't a prediction of doom, but a colossal misinterpretation that spread through global consciousness like a viral tick-tock dance. The reality was simple. The Mayan long count calendar was ending one cycle and starting another. It was the calendar equivalent of your computer restarting. Annoying, maybe, but hardly catastrophic. Yet this didn't stop the doomsday enthusiasts from having a field day. Why let facts ruin a good apocalypse, right? People love a good end-of-world story, and this one was irresistible. Ancient wisdom meets modern hysteria. It was an apocalyptic cocktail that even Nostradamus would envy. But let's not just blame the conspiracy theorists and their penchant for drama. Media outlets, sensing a good story, poured gasoline on the fire. Headlines screamed about the apocalypse. Documentaries speculated on ancient secrets. And Hollywood, never one to miss a beat, rolled out disaster movies faster than you could say box office hit. It was like a global reality show where everyone tuned in to see if we'd stick the landing or crash and burn. Spoiler, we stuck it, but without the fireworks. The 2012 frenzy is a classic case study in how myths perpetuate. The original Mayan calendar, with its rich cultural significance, was hijacked by modern imaginations, becoming a canvas for our deepest fears and fantasies. This wasn't the first time humanity donned its doomsday cap. History is littered with end-of-world predictions, each more dramatic than the last. Take the Millerites of the 19th century, who believed the world would end in 1844. When that didn't pan out, they dubbed it the Great Disappointment. A bit like finding out your favorite band's farewell tour is just an excuse to sell more merch. And then there's the Y2K bug, a technological apocalypse that had everyone hoarding canned beans and bottled water. If you were around in 1999, you'll remember the collective panic that computers would revolt at the stroke of midnight, January 1, 2000, plunging us into chaos. It was the digital equivalent of a toddler throwing a tantrum, loud and messy, but ultimately harmless. Turns out, a few lines of code were all that stood between civilization and chaos, fixed in time to ensure the world kept spinning. But why do we love these doomsday scenarios so much? Maybe it's our way of grappling with uncertainty, a psychological quirk that makes us seek meaning in chaos. Or perhaps it's just the thrill of the narrative, the allure of a story bigger than our mundane lives. After all, who wouldn't want to be part of the last chapter of Earth's history? It's like being cast in the ultimate disaster movie, with front-row seats to the greatest show never performed. The 2012 prophecy tapped into this primal fascination, a modern myth that echoed through time, blending ancient wisdom with contemporary anxieties. It's a reminder of how easily we can mold facts to fit fantasies, creating legends that endure despite their implausibility. The Mayan calendar became a cultural Rorschach test, revealing more about us than the ancient civilization that crafted it. It was less about the Mayans and more about our need to find patterns in the noise, to impose order on the chaos of existence. As the dust settled on 2012, the world continued its relentless march forward, leaving behind a trail of dashed expectations and relieved sighs. Yet the saga remains a testament to our enduring love affair with apocalyptic drama, a curious blend of fear and fascination that keeps us hooked. The Mayans may have given us a calendar, but it was our own imagination that transformed it into a doomsday script. And while the world didn't end, the story left an indelible mark, a reminder of how myths can shape reality in unexpected ways. So, as we move forward, let's keep an eye on how these stories evolve, how they reflect our hopes and fears, and how they continue to shape our understanding of the world. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that humans have a knack for storytelling, for weaving narratives that captivate and confound, even when the facts say otherwise. And as we delve deeper into the Mayan calendar's mysteries, who knows what other tales we might uncover, tales that speak not just of cycles and stars, but of the human spirit and its quest for meaning in a vast, unpredictable universe. As we peel back the layers of the Mayan calendar, it's time to get down to brass tacks, or should I say, stone carvings. This isn't just about numbers on a page. It's an intricate system that would make an Apple engineer weep with envy. The Mayan calendar wasn't just accurate. It was mind-blowingly precise, even by today's standards, and it played a pivotal role in the economic and political dynamics of their civilization. First, let's talk numbers, because the Mayans loved them like hipsters love avocado toast. The long count calendar was their magnum opus, capable of tracking time for over 5,125 years without a single glitch. Compare that to your smartphone, which can barely hold a charge for a day. The Mayans calculated the solar year as 365, 2420 days, just a hair's breadth off the modern value of 365. 2422 days. That's a difference of 2/10,000ths of a day. Blink and you'll miss it. This level of precision was crucial, not just for bragging rights, but for timing agricultural cycles and religious ceremonies with cosmic perfection. But wait, there's more. The Mayans also had their eye on Venus, the diva of the night sky. They tracked its cycles with an accuracy of 584 days, which is astonishingly close to the true value of 583. 92 days. This wasn't just an academic exercise. Venus played a key role in their divination practices and was integral to planning everything from harvests to wars. If Venus was in the wrong phase when you launched an attack, you might as well have shown up to a sword fight with a feather duster. Now, let's shift gears and see how this calendrical wizardry impacted Mayan society. Imagine a world where time literally was money. The calendar dictated the agricultural calendar, which in turn shaped trade and commerce. Knowing exactly when to plant corn or harvest cacao was the difference between prosperity and famine. It was like owning the world's most accurate stock ticker, where the commodity was life itself. The calendar wasn't just for farmers and skywatchers. It was the glue that held together political alliances and economic networks. Trade routes crisscrossed Mesoamerica, and the calendar was vital for coordinating exchanges and festivals that often doubled as diplomatic powwows. Can you imagine trying to organize a trade caravan without a reliable calendar? It would be like trying to assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. Chaos with a side of frustration. These interactions weren't just casual swaps. They were strategic moves in a high-stakes game of Mesoamerican chess. City-states like Tikal and Calakmul wielded the calendar as both a tool and a weapon, orchestrating alliances and rivalries with the precision of a master conductor. Who needs the United Nations when you've got a calendar that tells you when to make nice and when to sharpen your obsidian blades? The Mayans didn't just leave it there. They turned their calendar into a cultural export. The system spread far beyond the borders of their civilization, influencing neighboring cultures like the Aztecs and beyond. The calendar's reputation was such that it became a symbol of intellectual prowess, a calling card that said, "We know what we're doing, do you?" Of course, no system is without its drawbacks, and the Mayan calendar was no exception. It was an exclusive club, accessible only to those in the know. The elite held the secrets of the calendar, using it to consolidate power and control over the masses. Knowledge was power, and in the hands of the Mayan priesthood, it was a scepter that could make or break kings. Let's not sugarcoat it. The priests held the keys to the kingdom, and they weren't exactly handing out spare copies. This wasn't just about keeping the trains running on time. It was about maintaining the status quo. The calendar was a tool of hegemony, a way to reinforce the social hierarchy and ensure that those at the top stayed there. It was a celestial game of monopoly, and the priests owned all the railroads. Yet, for all its exclusivity, the calendar was also a source of wonder and inspiration. It offered a glimpse into the cosmic order, a reminder that the universe was vast and interconnected. The Mayans saw themselves as part of this grand tapestry, with the calendar as both guide and guardian. It was both a weapon and a window, a tool of oppression and a source of enlightenment. In many ways, the Mayan calendar was like a cosmic mirror, reflecting the dual nature of human society. It was a testament to our ability to innovate and inspire, to seek meaning in the stars and structure in the chaos. But it was also a reminder of our darker instincts, our tendency to use knowledge as a means of control. So, as we continue to explore the mysteries of the Mayan calendar, let's remember that it's a story of both genius and hubris, of celestial dreams and earthly realities. It's a tale that speaks to the heart of human nature, where the quest for understanding meets the hunger for power. And as we delve deeper into this ancient system, we may find that the more things change, the more they stay the same. In the grand tapestry of history, where every thread tells a tale of triumph or tragedy, the Mayan calendar stands as a testament to humanity's unyielding quest to master the cosmos. But here's the kicker. While the Mayans were busy unraveling the mysteries of time with all the flair of a celestial DJ, they probably never imagined their handiwork would become the darling of New Age enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, and curious tourists alike. Fast forward to our modern era, where the Mayan calendar's legacy is alive and kicking in ways that even the most clairvoyant Mayan priest couldn't have foreseen. For starters, you've got the tourism industry practically throwing a parade in its honor. Places like Chichen Itza and Tikal aren't just archaeological sites. They're time-traveling portals that rake in millions annually. In 2019 alone, Tikal welcomed over 300,000 visitors, each willing to shell out the entrance fee to walk in the footsteps of ancient astronomers. It's the kind of economic boon that would make any city planner drool, a testament to how ancient stone carvings can still mint modern cash. But let's not forget the calendar's cameo appearances in pop culture, where it's enjoyed more guest spots than a B-list celebrity. From movies and documentaries to those glossy coffee table books that no one actually reads but everyone insists on owning, the Mayan calendar has become a symbol of mystical allure. It's the eternal bad boy of ancient systems, promising secrets of the universe while dodging the need for a coherent narrative. Yet, beneath the glitz and glamour, there's a genuine respect for the calendar's scientific precision. Scholars and scientists continue to marvel at its accuracy, often comparing it to our own Gregorian calendar. Sure, the Mayans didn't have leap years, but their calculations of the solar year were so close to our 365, 24/22, days that it's almost embarrassing how much we rely on algorithms and atomic clocks. Their legacy is a reminder that sophistication doesn't always require silicon chips and supercomputers. Sometimes a bit of stone and a lot of brain power do the trick. Now, let's talk about the calendar's influence on contemporary culture, because it's not just for the history buffs and tourists. The calendar has inspired a wave of spiritual and philosophical movements that see it as more than just a way to track time. It's interpreted as a guide for personal transformation, a cosmic blueprint for living in harmony with the universe. Admittedly, this might be a bit of a stretch from its original agricultural and ceremonial purposes, but who can resist a touch of mysticism in their morning meditation routine? For many, the Mayan calendar is the ultimate symbol of cyclical time, offering an alternative to the relentless forward march of our linear calendars. It suggests that life isn't a straight line, but a series of cycles, each offering new beginnings. This resonates in a world that's constantly searching for meaning amid the chaos, a world where the promise of renewal is as comforting as it is elusive. It's like finding out your favorite TV series has been renewed for another season. There's always something new on the horizon. And what about the Mayans themselves? If they could see how their calendar has been interpreted and celebrated today, they might raise an eyebrow or two. Imagine their bewilderment at our obsession with managing every second of our lives, our apps that count steps, calories, even breaths. To the Mayans, time was a cosmic dance, a rhythm to be respected and revered, not a taskmaster to be appeased. They might chuckle at our attempts to control time with digital alerts and notifications, much like a deity watching mortals try to catch the wind. Yet, despite our differences, there's a common thread that binds us to the Mayans across the ages, our shared fascination with time. Whether it's planning a harvest or a work meeting, the desire to understand and organize time is universal. It's a reminder that while technology changes, the fundamental human quest remains the same. We all seek to find our place in the universe, to connect with something greater than ourselves, whether through the stars or our smartphone screens. In the end, the Mayan calendar is more than a relic of the past. It's a living legacy that continues to inspire and intrigue. It's a story of innovation and imagination, a testament to a civilization that saw time not as a constraint, but as a canvas. As we conclude our journey through the world of the Mayan calendar, let's remember that while the ancients may have charted the stars with a precision that still humbles us, they also left us with a legacy that challenges us to look beyond the numbers and see the universe as they did, a place of endless wonder and possibility. So, as we wrap up our cosmic adventure, let's tip our hats to the Mayans, those ancient timekeepers who understood that while we may never fully grasp the mysteries of the universe, the quest itself is what makes us human. And who knows, maybe one day we'll all embrace their wisdom and recognize that time, like life, is a cycle meant to be celebrated, not just counted. Nothing screams Roman Empire quite like the Colosseum, a place where grandeur, brutality, and architectural genius collide with enough force to make modern stadiums look like Lego sets. This colossal amphitheater, completed in 80 AD, was the brainchild of Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, constructed over the span of a decade. It could seat up to 50,000 bloodthirsty spectators, eager for a day's worth of gladiatorial combat, a sort of ancient Netflix binge, but with more gore and fewer snack breaks. Now, before we get carried away by visions of charioteers and Spartacus wannabes, let's dig into the nuts and bolts of this Roman wonder. First off, the logistics. The Colosseum, with its intricate system of vaults and arches, was an engineering triumph that screamed, "Look at us, we're Romans, we build stuff." But don't let the awe-inspiring arches fool you. This was no simple endeavor. The construction gobbled up around 100,000 cubic meters of travertine stone, hauled from quarries 20 miles away at Tivoli. That's like moving a small mountain, but who needs subtlety when you're building a monument to imperial power? The labor force behind this Herculean task was a motley crew of slaves, prisoners of war, and skilled laborers. Free labor wasn't exactly a Roman specialty, and the empire's expansion ensured a steady supply of human resources, albeit unwilling ones. Now, let's talk about the price tag. While exact figures are lost to history, it's safe to say the Colosseum cost a small fortune, enough to make a Roman senator clutch his toga in disbelief. The funding came from spoils of war, specifically the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Vespasian, ever the opportunist, funneled these ill-gotten gains into a massive PR campaign, aka the Colosseum, to distract citizens from the recent civil war and solidify his family's claim to the imperial throne. Nothing says stability like a public execution arena, right? But the Colosseum wasn't just about flexing imperial muscles. Its design was a marvel of practicality, too. The seating arrangement was a social stratification dream or nightmare, depending on your perspective. The best seats were reserved for the elite, the emperor perched in the imperial box, while the hoi polloi packed the nosebleeds. It was democracy, Roman style. Everyone got a seat, but not all seats were created equal. Of course, the Colosseum is just one chapter of Rome's architectural saga. Let's switch gears to another Roman masterpiece, the aqueduct. Picture this, a sprawling city with over 1 million residents and not a breather filter in sight. Romans needed water, lots of it, and they weren't about to rely on rain dances. Enter the aqueducts, those stone and concrete ribbons snaking across the countryside, channeling water into the heart of Rome. The Aqua Appia, Rome's first aqueduct, was completed in 312 BC, a mere 16 kilometers long. By the 3rd century AD, the empire boasted an impressive 11 aqueducts stretching over 800 kilometers. That's enough to hydrate a city and water every emperor's ego. These aqueducts were feats of engineering genius, achieving a gradient so precise it would make modern engineers weep with envy. The Aqua Claudia, completed in 52 AD under Emperor Claudius, was a monumental project, with sections standing 100 feet high. But the grandeur wasn't just for show. These aqueducts delivered a staggering 200 million gallons of water daily. That's enough to fill about 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools, a necessity when your public baths are the ancient equivalent of social media, minus the selfies. But why go to such lengths for water? For Rome, aqueducts were more than just a solution to thirst. They were a symbol of civilization itself. Clean water meant hygiene, and hygiene meant a healthier, more productive populace. Plus, it was a not-so-subtle way of demonstrating Rome's superiority over its less sophisticated neighbors. "We have running water, what do you have? Mud huts," was the unspoken taunt. However, let's not romanticize too much. The construction and maintenance of these aqueducts were no picnic. They required constant upkeep, with teams of workers on standby to fix leaks and remove debris. And while the aqueducts were free to use, the public baths they serviced came with a fee. Rome might have been the world's first welfare state, but even they knew you can't give everything away for free. So, while the Colosseum and aqueducts might make us swoon with admiration, it's important to remember the gritty reality behind these marvels. They were political tools, labor-intensive projects funded by conquest and built on the backs of the empires less fortunate. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, their brutal origins, these structures still stand as testaments to Roman ingenuity, a mix of practicality and propaganda, designed to keep the populace in awe and the empire's power indisputable. Rome wasn't built in a day, but when it was built, it was with an eye for spectacle and an iron grip on reality. As we wave goodbye to the grandeur of Roman engineering, let's pivot to another realm where Romans flexed their intellectual muscles, the world of literature and philosophy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all toga parties and poetic musings by moonlight. Meet Cicero, Virgil, and Seneca, the original influencers who wielded words like swords in the cutthroat arena of Roman society. First up, Cicero. Cicero, the poster child for eloquence, and a man who could talk his way out of, or into, anything. He was the ultimate politician, orator, and philosopher, a triple threat if there ever was one. Born in 106 BC in Arpinum, Cicero rose through the ranks of Roman politics with a tongue as sharp as a gladiator's sword. He didn't just write speeches. He crafted verbal symphonies that could sway the Senate and the mob alike. Cicero's orations were less about the art of persuasion and more about the power of survival. His words were his weapons in a world where political alliances shifted faster than you could say, et tu, brute. Cicero's most famous works include De Republica and De Legibus, which, despite sounding like a legal firm, tackled the intricacies of Roman law and governance. His writings were not just intellectual exercises. They were political manifestos, laced with the kind of rhetoric that could either crown an emperor or topple a dictator. Cicero's philosophical musings weren't merely academic. They were his bid to cement his legacy as Rome's moral compass. But let's not romanticize this too much. Cicero was also a master of the political backstab, and his downfall was a stark reminder that eloquence was no match for a well-placed dagger. In 43 BC, during the power struggles following Julius Caesar's assassination, Cicero found himself on the wrong side of Mark Antony. His head and hands were displayed in the forum, an unsubtle hint to keep one's speeches short and sweet. Next, we have Virgil, the bard of the Roman Empire. Born in 70 BC in northern Italy, Virgil was the literary genius behind the Aeneid, Rome's answer to Homer's epics. Think of it as the Roman Empire's blockbuster sequel to the Iliad and the Odyssey, with a script that Augustus himself might have commissioned. The poem follows the Trojan hero Aeneas and his journey to found what would become Rome, and it's packed with enough divine intervention and epic battles to make Hollywood salivate. But here's the kicker. The Aeneid was as much about political propaganda as it was about heroic tales. Virgil's work was the ultimate PR campaign for Augustus, painting him as the divinely ordained ruler of a new golden age. It was less about celebrating history and more about rewriting it to suit the emperor's vision. But let's not kid ourselves. Virgil's genius was undeniable. While the Aeneid served Augustus's political agenda, it also captured the Roman spirit, blending myth with the harsh realities of conquest and empire. Virgil worked on it until his death in 19 BC, reportedly requesting it to be burned because it was unfinished, a request Augustus wisely ignored. The emperor knew a cultural treasure when he saw one, and the Aeneid became a cornerstone of Roman education and identity. Virgil's words were etched into the Roman psyche, proof that the pen, or stylus in this case, was indeed mightier than the sword. Finally, let's talk about Seneca, the philosopher who moonlighted as a statesman and playwright. Born in 4 BC in Corduba, Spain, Seneca found himself at the heart of imperial politics, serving as an advisor to none other than Emperor Nero. Imagine playing life coach to a man who fiddled while Rome burned. Seneca had his work cut out for him. His philosophical writings, from Letters to Lucilius to On the Shortness of Life, explored Stoic themes such as virtue, reason, and the futility of anger. Seneca preached the virtues of a simple life, which was a tad ironic given his own wealth and power. But hey, nobody's perfect. Seneca's philosophy wasn't just ivory tower musings. It was a survival guide for navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics. His Stoic principles were his armor in a world where emperors could turn from patron to executioner on a whim. And sure enough, in 65 AD, caught up in a conspiracy against Nero, Seneca was ordered to take his own life, a grim reminder that even the wisest minds couldn't escape the caprices of imperial favor. These literary titans, Cicero, Virgil, and Seneca, weren't just thinkers. They were players in a game where words were as powerful as legions. Their works had social and political ramifications that rippled through Roman society, shaping public opinion and imperial policy alike. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of intellectual leisure. These men operated in a brutal world where literature was a tool for influence and survival, not just a pursuit of beauty or truth. In the end, Roman literature and philosophy were as much about power and propaganda as they were about art and wisdom. The works of Cicero, Virgil, and Seneca remind us that in Rome, as in life, the line between culture and politics was as thin as a papyrus scroll. So, while we marvel at their intellectual achievements, let's not forget the gritty realities lurking beneath the poetic veneer. These were men who understood that in the grand theatre of Rome, every word was a performance, every sentence a calculated move in the eternal game of power. And that, dear friends, is a legacy that echoes through the ages, proving once again that while empires fall, the power of words endures. With the echoes of Cicero's oratory and Virgil's epic verse still reverberating in our minds, let's shift our gaze to the vivid spectacle of Roman entertainment. If you've ever thought modern society is obsessed with reality TV and sports, well, the Romans were the OGs of mass distraction. We're talking about gladiatorial games where the stakes were life and death, a tad more intense than your average football match, wouldn't you say? The heart of this ancient spectacle was the amphitheater, the most famous being the Colosseum, which we've already toured. But here's the real kicker. Gladiatorial games were less about the artistry of combat and more about the economics of control. The term bread and circuses, coined by the poet Juvenal, perfectly encapsulates the Roman strategy for keeping the populace happy and, more importantly, compliant. Distract them with free grain and bloody games, and you've got a recipe for a docile citizenry. Forget political discourse, just cue the gladiators. Economically, these games were a financial black hole, yet emperors like Vespasian and Titus saw them as an investment in their political capital. The cost of a single day of games could rival the GDP of a small Roman province. Take the inaugural games of the Colosseum in 80 AD, for instance. They lasted a whopping 100 days and included the slaughter of over 9,000 animals. That's not just a spectacle, it's a meat market on steroids. And while the crowds roared for more, the empire's coffers groaned under the weight of its own lavishness. But the Romans didn't stop at animal hunts and gladiator duels. They also hosted extravagant normatia, or naval battles, which were staged in flooded arenas. Imagine the logistics, filling a stadium with water, building ships, and then sinking them for entertainment. Talk about going overboard, literally and financially. These aquatic spectacles were less about military prowess and more about flexing imperial muscle, all while keeping the masses too entertained to notice their dwindling freedoms. Now let's talk gladiators, those rugged symbols of Roman might. Contrary to the Hollywood image of noble warriors, most gladiators were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war. Their training was rigorous, akin to a deadly boot camp, and they were the property of their Lannister or trainer. Winning a fight could earn a gladiator fame, fortune, and possibly freedom, but let's not romanticize it. The odds of survival were grim. The mortality rate was high, with estimates suggesting that only 1 in 10 gladiators lived to see retirement, assuming they weren't killed by a fellow combatant or an emperor's whim. The economic model of gladiatorial schools was surprisingly modern. These ludus were akin to sports franchises, with significant investments in training, equipment, and healthcare, because a dead gladiator doesn't sell tickets. Successful fighters could become superstars, their likenesses adorning everything from household items to frescoes. But before you start picturing them as ancient celebrities, remember they were still considered property. Their fame was a double-edged sword, one that could lead to freedom or a brutal end in the arena. Public festivals were another cornerstone of Roman entertainment, offering a more family-friendly alternative to the gore of the games. The Ludi Romani, for instance, were annual religious festivals that included chariot races, theatrical performances, and the kind of pomp and ceremony that made the Super Bowl halftime show look like amateur hour. These events were funded by the state, and attending was practically a civic duty. After all, what better way to display Rome's wealth and unity than by throwing a party for the gods and the people? Yet, beneath the layers of celebration and ritual lay a carefully orchestrated display of power. Festivals were a political tool, reinforcing the divine right of emperors and the glory of Rome. They were the empire's way of saying, "Look how prosperous we are, let's celebrate," while quietly ensuring that any dissent was drowned out by cheers and applause. The costs, while staggering, were justified as insurance against unrest. A happy populace, entertained and well-fed, was less likely to revolt. In debunking the romantic mythos of Roman entertainment, we uncover a society that understood the art of distraction long before it became a marketing strategy. The grandeur of the games and festivals masked a shrewd political calculus, one that balanced the scales of power with the weight of public spectacle. It was a delicate dance of excess and control, a testament to Rome's ability to turn even leisure into a weapon of statecraft. As we leave the blood-stained sands of the arena behind, let us ponder this. While the Romans perfected the spectacle, were they truly entertained or simply pacified? The answer, like the empire itself, is complex. Their legacy of games and festivals offers a window into a world where the line between entertainment and propaganda was razor-thin, and where the roar of the crowd was both a blessing and a curse. So, as we prepare to explore the next chapter of Roman innovation, let's remember that history is not just a series of events, but a reflection of human nature itself, flawed, ambitious, and always searching for the next grand spectacle. Before we immerse ourselves in the labyrinth of Roman legalese, let's get one thing straight. The Roman legal system was no walk in the forum. It's like comparing a modern courtroom drama to a reality show. Both have their fair share of theatrics, but one promises justice while the other just delivers drama. Roman law in its heyday was the backbone of the empire, a sprawling legal Frankenstein's monster built on centuries of precedent, custom, and a fair bit of political intrigue. It was a system that promised fairness, but often delivered a swift kick from an emperor's sandal. So let's unravel the toga of Roman law, starting with its holy grail, the 12 Tables. Drafted around 450 BC, these were Rome's first attempt at a written legal code, a sort of ancient FAQ for society's do's and don'ts. Imagine a world where legal knowledge was hoarded by the patricians like secret family recipes. The 12 Tables were meant to level the playing field, but spoiler alert, they didn't quite get there. They covered everything from debt and inheritance to funerals and public behavior. Think of it as a precursor to your local bylaws, but with more stabbings. The tables were a mix of common-sense rules and some head-scratchers, like the one allowing creditors to chop up a debtor's body if he couldn't pay his debts, as long as all creditors got an equal share. Fair, maybe. Gruesome, definitely. Fast forward to the Roman Republic and Empire, and you find a legal system that would make a modern lawyer's head spin. Roman law evolved into a complex web of statutes, edicts, and legal opinions, an empire-spanning legal buffet. The centerpiece of this legal feast was the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law, compiled under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century AD. It was the ultimate legal remix, a compilation of centuries of Roman legal thought, and would later serve as a foundation for modern legal systems across Europe. But let's not get starry-eyed over Justinian's legal opus. While Roman law was the gold standard, its practice was often a different beast. The Roman courts were arenas of eloquence and influence, where the right connections were as crucial as the right arguments. Imagine a courtroom where Cicero's silver tongue could sway a jury as much as the facts. Roman trials were public spectacles, complete with crowds and oratory flair that would make even a seasoned litigator sweat. Justice, in theory, was blind, but in practice, it often peeked beneath the blindfold to see who was paying the bills. One of the most romanticized aspects of Roman law is the idea of the paterfamilias, the head of the Roman family, wielding almost godlike powers over his household. This patriarchal figure had the legal authority to dictate nearly every aspect of family life, from arranging marriages to executing unruly children. It was a domestic dictatorship wrapped in a veneer of family values. Yet beneath this mythos lies a harsh reality. Women and children had limited rights, essentially existing under the legal shadow of their male relatives. It was a system that, for all its claims to order and justice, often left the most vulnerable at the mercy of those wielding the family scepter. Economically, the Roman legal system was both a boon and a burden. On one hand, it facilitated trade and commerce across the vast empire, with legal contracts and property rights providing a semblance of stability in a world where emperors changed faster than fashion trends. On the other hand, justice often came with a price tag. Legal proceedings could be prohibitively expensive, with legal fees and bribes greasing the wheels of the judicial machine. The rich and powerful could afford the best advocates, while the average citizen might find themselves priced out of justice altogether, left to navigate the legal jungle with little more than a prayer to the goddess Justicia. Speaking of gods, let's talk about the divine right of emperors and its legal implications. Roman law was often shaped by the whims of its rulers, who were not just political leaders, but also chief priests, holding sway over both earthly and divine matters. Emperors had the power to issue edicts and decrees that could override existing laws, effectively making them the ultimate legal authority. This was a double-edged sword. While it allowed for swift legal innovation, it also meant that the law could be as fickle as the emperor's favor. One day you might be a favored senator. The next, you could find yourself on trial for treason, your fate sealed by the flick of an imperial wrist. And let's not forget the Roman penchant for punishment. While we might picture Roman justice as being all about public trials and eloquent oratory, the reality was often much harsher. Punishments could be brutal, ranging from fines and exile to flogging and execution. The Romans were masters of making an example out of criminals, with public executions serving as both entertainment and a stark warning to would-be lawbreakers. Crucifixion was reserved for the most heinous crimes, a slow and agonizing death that was as much about deterrence as it was about justice. Yet, despite its flaws, Roman law has left an indelible mark on history. Its principles of justice, equity, and legal precedent have echoed through the ages, shaping modern legal systems in ways that would surprise even the most seasoned Roman jurist. The concept of innocent until proven guilty, for example, is a Roman legacy, as is the notion of legal representation and the right to a fair trial. These ideas, born from the forums and courtrooms of ancient Rome, have survived the fall of empires and the march of time, testaments to Rome's enduring influence. In the end, Roman law was a reflection of the empire itself, grand in scope, ambitious in its reach, yet deeply flawed in practice. It was a system that promised justice but often delivered power, where ideals of fairness were overshadowed by the realities of politics and privilege. As we continue our journey through the annals of Roman achievement, let's remember that the legacy of Roman law is not just in its principles, but in its contradictions. It is a reminder that the pursuit of justice is as much about navigating the complexities of human nature as it is about the letter of the law. And that, dear friends, is a truth as old as Rome itself. As we leave behind the labyrinth of Roman legalese, let's pivot to a subject where Roman pragmatism truly shone: technological and scientific advancements. Imagine a world where your idea of a smart home was a villa equipped with an aqueduct-fed bath and hypocoursed heating system. That's right, folks, the Romans were the original tech moguls, but instead of Silicon Valley, they had the 7 Hills. So grab your stylus and let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Roman innovation, starting with medicine. Picture a bustling Roman city. The streets teem with life, and in the midst of it all, there's a Roman medicus, or doctor, wielding his toolkit like a gladiator with a scalpel. Roman medicine was a curious blend of Greek theories and Roman practicality. While the Greeks gave us Hippocrates and the Hippocratic Oath, the Romans were more about, fix it now, philosophize later. Aulus Cornelius Celsus, a Roman writer in the 1st century AD, penned De Medicina, an extensive medical treatise that became the go-to manual for centuries. This book covered everything from surgery to diet, and while it might not hold a candle to modern medical texts, it was revolutionary for its time. Roman doctors were surprisingly advanced. They performed cataract surgeries and even had rudimentary forms of anesthesia like spongia somnifera, a sponge soaked in opium and mandrake. Not exactly FDA approved, but it did the trick. Public health was another Roman forte. They understood the importance of clean water and sanitation, as evidenced by their public baths and sewage systems. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, was the empire's silent hero, whisking away the city's waste and ensuring the populace didn't drown in its own filth. Talk about infrastructure that really mattered. Speaking of infrastructure, let's turn our gaze to Roman roads. We've all heard the saying, all roads lead to Rome. Well, that wasn't just a catchy phrase, it was a logistical reality. The Roman road network spanned over 250,000 miles, with 50,000 miles of paved roads. These were the literal arteries of the empire, facilitating trade, military movements, and imperial control. The Via Appia, Rome's Queen of Roads, stretched 132 miles from Rome to Brindisi, and was as straight as an arrow, illustrating Roman engineering precision. Unlike a modern asphalt jungle, Roman roads were marvels of layered construction, using stones, gravel, and sand to create durable surfaces that have, in some places, outlasted the empire itself. Now, let's not romanticize these stone highways too much. While they were engineering feats, they were also built on the backs of countless workers, often slaves or conscripts. The economic payoff was significant, though. These roads slashed travel times, boosted trade, and allowed Rome to project its power across vast distances. They were the backbone of an empire that understood that control of the land was as much about connectivity as it was about conquest. But the Romans didn't stop at roads. Their military engineering was the stuff of legend. Take the ballista, a giant crossbow capable of hurling projectiles with deadly accuracy. It was the Roman answer to the question, how do you win a siege without waiting a year? Roman military camps, or castra, were masterpieces of logistics, designed to be constructed in a single day with precise layouts for optimal defense and efficiency. It's said that when Julius Caesar crossed the Rhine in 55 BC, he built a bridge in just 10 days, a feat that left the Germanic tribes on the other side, questioning their life choices. The economic and military prowess of Rome was, in many ways, underpinned by these technological innovations. They allowed Rome to maintain an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt, a realm of over 50 million souls at its height. But let's not forget the human cost. These innovations were fueled by the labor and lives of Rome's conquered peoples, a reality that often gets lost in the shadow of Rome's monumental achievements. Now, as we wind down our journey through the marvels of Roman ingenuity, it's time to tackle the elephant in the room, the empire's long-term impact on Western civilization. Roman culture didn't just vanish when the empire fell. It morphed, leaving indelible marks on everything from language to architecture. The Latin language birthed the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Even English, that mongrel tongue, owes much of its vocabulary to Latin roots. In architecture, Rome left a legacy of grandeur and utility. The Pantheon's dome, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, inspired countless structures. In governance, the Roman Republic's model of elected officials and senatorial debate laid the groundwork for modern democratic practices. The Roman legal system, with its principles of justice and equity, continues to influence legal thought globally. Concepts like habeas corpus and legal representation have their roots in Roman law. But here's the kicker. While Rome gifted the world with these cultural treasures, it also left a legacy of imperialism and inequality. The empire's obsession with conquest and control set precedents for colonial ambitions and power dynamics that would echo through history. Rome's reliance on slavery and its stratified society remind us that progress often comes at a human cost, a sobering thought for any civilization aspiring to greatness. So, as we conclude this whirlwind tour of Roman cultural achievements, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to the paradox that was Rome. It was a civilization of contradictions, a beacon of innovation that was also a bastion of inequality, a font of cultural riches built on the backs of the disenfranchised. Its legacy is a testament to the duality of human endeavor, a reminder that the pursuit of greatness is as fraught with peril as it is with promise. And that, dear friends, is the enduring lesson of Rome, that history's true power lies not in its monuments of stone, but in its stories of ambition, folly, and the eternal quest for a better tomorrow.